This is Jason Anderson, Chairman of the Killenly Town Council, and we are calling this special Town Council meeting to order. For roll call purposes, all council members are in attendance except for Mr. Whitehead, who is absent with notification, and also Ms. Murphy. At this time, we will open up for public comment. Did we have anything submitted?
None were submitted.
Last call for public comment. Seeing no public comment, we'll move on in the agenda. Next item up is budget review.
Good morning, everyone. So we're gonna start our annual process of going page by page through the budget document. You should have all received a budget document along with a page that says, what does this mill rate mean to me? And that kind of gives a highlight as to what are the major changes within the mill rate or within the budget. I also included a page that outlines the balances of all the various reserve accounts that we talk about as we're going through the budget. And lastly, you also received a budget to actual for where we are in the current fiscal year. So I know that that was a request in the previous years that we have a column for kind of where we are right now. Based on the budget document that we have and trying to provide you with 5 years worth of data, adding another column, you'll know as you go through your budget document, some of these pages are pretty cramped, and adding another column would have made those numbers even smaller and I think more difficult and challenging to read. So we did incorporate the budget to actual for the revenue and the expenditures, and they are grouped by department, so you should be able to easily flip to that department and compare it to your budget book in looking at where we are in the current year. So I am actually going to just highlight a little bit within my budget message. With regards to the general government budgets, we have the A3 page gives an overview and a breakdown of kind of where the main components are with the general government operating budget. Town operations, which I would consider your town ongoing expenses, that is reflecting an overall increase of $667,000 or 5.43% increase. Human services subsidies is broken out separately, so while that is part of the overall general government budget, I've broken that out separately as I did in the past because those are outside agencies that are asking for funding, and those get passed directly onto the town council for decision. I do not make recommendations around those outside agency requests. And that does have an increase of $156,000 or 18%. And then the next one, debt service. So in this year, what we're in the process of doing right now is actually issuing notes as opposed to issuing formal bonds. We're doing that for two reasons. One, with the upcoming changeover in my position, it is more beneficial to the town and better to be able to sell bonds when you have a seated and placed long-term town manager in place when you're selling those bonds. So we are looking at only doing notes right now. Secondly, it will also delays the initial principal payment of that debt for one more year, which gets us closer to the 2027 year, which would be the year that some of the other high school debt falls off. So it better aligns with, instead of really having a jump in the mill rate and then backing down a little bit more. So what you're seeing there for the $620,000 is strictly interest on the note that is being issued currently. That note will come due in October, and the town will be able to make a decision whether they roll the note or they go into some level of permanent borrowing for that note. It also gives more time to make sure that we're only borrowing the necessary amount for KMS. We are trying to roll through the closing portion of that project, and there's filings that still have to be done with the state. So overall, the town's general government operations, if you will, that has an increase in the budget, in the overall mill rate impact of 1.6 million. The other indication to this that I just want to highlight is, number one, for Lake Road generating money, we utilized out of that pilot agreement for general fund revenue, the same figure that we've used in the past. Anything that was above that $3.1 million, we reflected that as capital contribution, as we've done in the past. The other component is in the current fiscal year, you utilized $750,000 of general fund balance to lower the mill rate. The proposal that I have before you brings that down to $500,000. So it shows that continual movement off of utilization of fund balance in order to be able to demonstrate to your credit rating agencies that you are not trying to just rely on fund balance for operational purposes. So the increase for general government is 0.92 mils, which which is largely the debt service and the reduction in your use of fund balance. Next is capital projects. So capital projects is pretty much just road renewal. That's just the pavement management projects for the upcoming year for funding from the general fund. This is the pass-through of the remaining allocation of the Lake Road generating at the 1.5. But again, I'm recognizing a step down in utilization of general fund contribution, and that could get changed. So in the current year, you're utilizing $2,250,000. The budget before you has a step down on that. And so you would then be utilizing, but it is putting $1,250,000 of road renewal costs into the mill rate. The last one is education, and that just reviews what the education budget as it was adopted by the Board of Education. So another highlight to just consider, or for me to be able to bring to your attention, is with regards to the municipal spending cap. So in prior years, so the municipal spending cap has been in place since 2015. The first couple of years, it didn't have an impact on us because there was no penalty associated. It wasn't tied in legislation to any specific penalty or any specific funding source. In 2018, they tied it to a funding source. However, distressed municipalities were exempted. So I'm on page A6. Municipalities that were considered distressed municipalities were exempted from municipal spending cap, which meant that if you exceeded the municipal spending cap, which by legislation is 2.5% or the adjusted amount based on inflation, if your expenditures, if the town's expenditures minus some eligible deductions from those expenditures, which are special education, debt service, capital investment, if that percentage year over year increase was higher than that 2.5 or the adjusted amount of that inflation, if it was higher than that, then the penalty was 50 cents for every dollar you exceeded. And that was a reduction off the municipal revenue sharing grant. Killingly hasn't been impacted by this because for the beginning part of this, we were a distressed municipality, and so therefore it didn't apply. Even if we exceeded the spending cap, it didn't apply to us. We didn't have any penalty associated with that. Last year was really the first year that we would have become subject to that and been potentially having to be really paying attention to that spending cap. But the spending cap percentage last year was over 6%. It was like almost 6.6%, right? It was quite high because of inflation, right? So that percentage is set by OPM. So we got the notification from OPM back in February. Municipal spending cap for this year is 3.31%, right? So again, so this budget that you have before you right now is a 6.47% increase. So it exceeds the spending cap, okay? What does that mean? So I will say in the years that municipalities could have been hit with a penalty, nobody's been hit with a penalty. Why? In each year that there has been a possibility of a municipality being hit with a penalty under the municipal spending cap, our legislators have passed waiver language, right? And they have proposed and waived any penalties in those given years. So that happened in 2022, and in 2023, and 2024. They also didn't have penalties that ended up getting applied. That being said, and there is currently legislation that our legislators have proposed and that the governor has proposed for this year that would either reduce or potentially eliminate a potential penalty. But, as being fiscally responsible, I need to let you know that if this budget were adopted as it stood, you would potentially have an impact of up to $268,000 of what our municipal revenue sharing grant is, because we are exceeding the municipal revenues, the municipal spending cap, by almost $1.5 million. So the budgets, and it would have to be operational expenditures that are reduced. So reducing investment in capital does not adjust this municipal spending cap percentage. Changing what you're doing, reducing what the investment is in special education doesn't change this, right? So again, just letting you know, and the current legislation still holds that if you exceed it, the penalty is 50 cents to every dollar, right, of what is exceeded beyond that municipal spending cap. Could that change with legislation that's being proposed right now? Yes, it could. We will not likely know what that legislation outcome is until June. Okay, I'm just gonna right? Middle of June. So it's going to be after you've deliberated on this budget and after you've had potentially multiple votes on, hopefully only one vote. I would love to only see one vote, but potentially have already voted on this budget as well. So, that's a decision that you as council and the townspeople would need to make with regards to this budget.
So the estimate is, what'd you say, 260 would be?
So the grant that we're receiving as the base grant is $268,000. It would be more than that because 50% of what we're exceeding right now would be, close to 800, almost 700 and change. So we would lose the full 268,000. Right. And any supplemental. There has been years that the grant has paid out a supplemental. We would also lose the supplemental as well.
So if I understand this right, you're saying that with this budget, it would basically be $736,000 penalty.
Correct. Which they would only be able to claw back just the money that we get through the municipal revenue sharing, so they wouldn't be able to send us a bill for the rest. But you would lose. Your max cap of loss is really the $268,000 because that's what we have for a base grant, right?
So it would really be the 736 minus 268.
No, it would only be 268,000.
It would only be 268.
Yeah, because that's our grant amount. But if our grant was higher, they could go up to the $700,000.
Okay.
But we just don't have that high of a grant.
Did we have I'm sure you're going to get. Is there a number per mill this year or no, not yet?
For how much we're increasing for, the value of a mill.
Value of a
We're
mill.
going to get there, right,
Okay.
coming up.
No worries. Good.
No, that's fine. Good question.
I do have one question on that topic. How often, if it has happened, have they increased the amount of that grant?
They have not increased that, and I will say that the governor's, based on the current governor's proposed budget, he proposes to eliminate this grant funding source in 2027 completely.
Which would have no effect on this year, so.
Which doesn't have any effect on this year, but going forward,
Yeah.
it will have, it has that impact. So, again, that's dependent on if the governor's budget is adopted as he's presented it for that component. And we won't know really that until June.
And currently, the budget is not balanced for Connecticut. So
Correct.
I can definitely see them taking this away.
Yeah, well, it's definitely
Or
proposed.
charging
Yeah.
everybody, other towns.
Yeah, it's definitely proposed to go away in 2027 budget, the second year of the biennium anyway. So, so that's kind of, we're gonna go over all of the other, what's increased and, what the drivers are for each of the departments when we're going through those departments, so I didn't want to spend a lot of time going through those in my manager's budget. I did provide you with a 10-year review of our fund balance, and that's that way, as you're going through and determining whether or not you want to activate the use of a higher use of fund balance in order to reduce that mill rate, you have your basis for that. So let's go to B1. I feel like I'm calling bingo. B1. Right? It's not nearly as much fun though, right? Somebody's got to yell bingo during the day, that's all. So here is where you get your value of a mill, right? So your value of a mill is $1,811,640. That's the value of 1 mill, okay? So this just outlines for you our current budget. We are at a mill rate of 20.32. Our proposed budget that you have before you for next year is 23.45. And we're not going to spend really a lot of time on this because this is just the very, very high level, right? The 11,000 foot view of the budget. And I'm going to largely move past the summary pages that are in the B pages, because again, they're summary pages, and we're going to go budget, department by department on these. Just gladly go back and answer any questions on them, but moving over to the green pages, we are at revenues. Green. So, we did, with regards to the value of a mill, we did implement the local option that you had adopted for the motor vehicle. So that did change some of that number. But with that, when we're looking at the revenue pages, supplemental motor vehicle, we are number one, estimating that we're not going to achieve our revenue estimate of $400,000, and we're seeing a kind of softening a bit of the car market, especially new car market, and so we suspect that value will decrease, and we won't have as much value that we're going to be able to tax on for supplemental. So supplemental motor vehicle is usually the tax bill that is given to individuals that purchase vehicles mid-year, right? They are not on the October 1st grand list, and so they're purchased mid-year. Secondly, then the other line item that you're seeing a slight reduction on is the tax interest. And so while we anticipate bringing in the same level of back taxes, our tax interest is lower because we have collected a lot of the really old taxes, and so there's not as much interest calculation or interest that we're collecting even with those back taxes. So that's a little bit of a decrease. Again, you're seeing that we're not meeting or we're not expecting to meet the current year budget estimate.
But we're doing the job in collecting taxes.
We are. We're just doing it really well.
So in that respect, I guess,
Yes.
you don't get it from the tax interest, but right away, we're getting the money that we need to get, so.
Right. We'd rather
Which is worse?
Well, we'd rather collect it current, right? We rather would not have to charge the interest at all, and it's good to know that we are collecting it sooner, and those interest charges are not further building. So, that is performance from our revenue office.
I've got a question on
yeah.
the motor vehicle taxes. I looked at some numbers on my own vehicles. I know you had talked about the shift in the change in the grand list, how much we would have lost. When you came up with those numbers, did you look at was there software to look at every single vehicle and do an
Yes.
exact calculation?
Yes.
Because I looked at my own vehicles, and I've got one vehicle that's going from book value of $11,000 up to, on the depreciation schedule, is going to be $21,000. So that one vehicle is a $10,000 increase.
Yeah.
My other two are almost a wash. One of them goes up $1,500. The other one's going down $900.
Yeah.
I was just, when I saw that huge shift, I was just wondering if you use the actual numbers on every vehicle on the grand list.
We did. So our software company had to load in the MSRPs for all vehicles onto our software, and so we were able to run that comparison.
Okay.
Yep, so it was run for all vehicles on the list. And again, there are some people that are going to see an up, and there's others that are going to see a significant decline.
Yeah.
So yes, it depends on where your vehicle is.
Just a question on, was there any explanation from the legislation how this was supposed to actually decrease the motor vehicle tax? Because it's,
I've been talking about this for 3 years, and our legislature has not acknowledged that this is an added tax burden, whether it is because your motor vehicle is now going to be assessed higher, or whether it's because you are now shifting that burden onto residential real estate. I've had this. I've been screaming at the top of my lungs for 3 years over this.
yeah, because it's still presented as, decreasing your taxes.
I know. I know. Correct. And they make the municipalities look like the bad guys. That's all they do. Interest income, I have recognized in my column an increase in the interest income. And so we are expecting to see higher than we had estimated for our interest income, levels. We have been still outperforming that. And we were very conservative on this last year only because we weren't, with the level of capital projects that we had going on, we weren't sure how much we were going to have for available funds to earn interest, because we have some pretty substantial projects going on. Now that we're nearly complete with KMS, and we are chugging along, I will say, for the community center. I don't know that I want to say we see the light at the end of that tunnel yet, but we're getting there. And with the reimbursement that we're going to be able to, that we're doing with the notes, I think that we have the ready available. So I think that we're going to be able to meet that $550,000. So I've increased that by $200,000 for the proposed income, and that's really based on where interest rates are still holding and how much available cash is available to be able to be invested in those interest-bearing accounts. The next section, state grants in lieu of taxes. This comes directly off of the governor's budget. And so as our legislature changes things, so the municipal revenue sharing grant that I was talking about is that municipal stabilization grant. They've changed the names on it at least 10 times in the last 15 years. So that's municipal stabilization grant is the municipal revenue sharing. The other state grants, again, we get those direct from OPM for additional grants, and we are recognizing the full amount of the Mohegan Pequot. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question, and this is from the public in regards to the approximately 250 acres of land that the state bought by Pizza King. Is the state paying taxes or in lieu of taxes to the town?
Well, we get a payment for payment in lieu of taxes. It's not fully funded. We get a percentage of what our taxes would be. The towns have been loudly voicing that the state should pay their share of taxes locally. They don't. They did do an adjustment to that, and you can see that over the years, like this current year is the biggest adjustment we've seen in payment in lieu of taxes because it's all bundled into that one number. You see an adjustment there. Inevitably, we'll see where our legislature brings us, but it doesn't fully fund
So
property
essentially,
taxes.
to the public, the state is not paying the town the taxes that they should be.
They're only paying a percentage of them. Correct. Correct.
So you're saying last year was 269, and this year it's gonna be 354.
That's what the governor's proposed budget is 354.
And that's to us for what state-owned property here in Killingley.
Correct. Any state-owned property here in Killingley, so that's,
Is there any way to figure out what it would be if they were paying what?
yeah, I can get that calculation from the assessors.
It's fair. It's
I
fair to know.
was just going to ask that.
Yeah, it's a-
Yeah.
it's a good.
I want to say that we're not even at 50%. Not even. I think it's somewhere in the 30s.
Do they, okay,
Yeah, go ahead.
no, it's a waste of time.
Well,
There's no explanation of them owning it, there's no explanation, you're not getting an explanation of why.
There's no money in the budget for it.
There's no money in the budget for it.
Maybe you shouldn't buy stuff that's,
I mean, there are some towns that have there are some towns that have substantially high amounts of state-owned property, like Voluntown. I mean, yeah, Yukon. I mean, that's all state-owned property. Even the hospitals like Hartford and New Haven, they have large quantities of state-owned properties.
Some of that tax burden's on them.
Right.
But there is actually money in the budget because the public benefits keep increasing.
Well, getting back to that, I had a discussion with Williamsville Fire District, and they were talking, they gotta support Ellis Tech and the airport,
Yep.
and they don't get anything from the state, or do we, is there any way to?
The districts don't receive payment in lieu of taxes. Nope. The only one that does receive a little, I think the borough does receive, but they're considered, it's a different, because they're a borough.
They're a government, yeah.
They're different.
Right, they can get,
But no, the fire districts don't receive payment in lieu of taxes at all.
so if they're looking at, their budget, what they have to support, the fire suppression for the airport, He just threw this out the other day, I said, come to the, here, I
Yep.
want them there. And
It's challenging.
Yes,
Absolutely agree,
yes.
it's challenging.
he says, well, you guys get all this money, why?
it's not really.
And you don't really get all this money, because they're not really covering it.
You're getting whatever the state is sending, it goes to the town, it doesn't get to the fire district.
Yep.
We supply a lot of services.
Yeah, understand that.
I do have one question. I know you had talked about the revenue sharing grant, and that if the budget passes at where it is, we lose that based on what current legislation is. Is there anywhere in this budget that reflects the loss of that? Because I see you still have it listed here as a revenue.
I do, because it's ultimately up to the town to determine whether or not you would take that risk of losing it. There are a number of legislative proposals out there, including the governor's budget. The governor's budget is proposing that it would reduce this to only 10%, which would be a $26,000 loss, right? So, based on the history of this grant and the history of the penalties, they've never once held true to the 50 cents to the dollar. But again,
It could be that year.
you need to understand the risk and exposure on that, right?
All right, I was just wondering if you had another spot in here where
I
it
don't.
reflected the potential loss of that.
Nope, I don't.
Okay.
The next page, C2, largely, most of these have remained, for the most part, the same. We're going up on conveyance tax. Again, that's tied to real estate transactions. Recreation, I just want to point out the anticipated increase in revenue for recreation, and that is largely due to the transitioning over to Westfield Avenue and the theater productions, the larger, and you're going to see that there are expenses tied to that when we get to recreation, but they are offset by this revenue generation for that department. The other section, other revenues, a lot of this is, what I would consider reimbursements from other funds, like our sewer assessment, sewer operating, the law enforcement, that is reimbursement from the Board of Education. We are also identifying the local cannabis revenue that we're receiving, which is being utilized for offsetting our recreation, because that does have specific restrictions around the utilization of those funds. So we're utilizing it for civic and cultural expenditures, with regards to recreation to be able to meet the legislative requirements around that revenue source.
Where's the revenue from the NIPS?
That's a separate fund. We have to, because of the restrictions around that, that had to go into a separate fund, and that fund is in the F pages, and we will be talking about that fund.
Thanks.
The last one that I want to bring to your attention is with regards to the school, and I know Sue will probably go over this in greater detail. But when you get down to the school under tuition, vocational and agricultural, you'll see that historically, we have been receiving over $800,000 in tuition for our VOAG, vocational and agricultural division. And that dropped dramatically in the current year by $400,000. And that is because in 2024, our legislature put through a law that is now Public Act 24-81, and in section 114 of that, it caps tuition for VOAG and magnet schools at 58% of the 2024 tuition. So they cannot bill out 100% of the tuition for their program. They can only bill out 58%. And so we have a huge loss in revenue there. That is an implementation that has hit in the current fiscal year, and you'll note that that is a huge revenue hole for the town in the current fiscal year that will likely have a overall ending impact of a reduction in fund balance because of that revenue gap. So there's no over expenditure, but there is a loss of revenue that is ultimately going to net to an impact to the fund balance. Yes.
Where am I seeing it reflected? So under school.
So if you go under school where it says vocational agricultural, the very bottom line in that, you see in the current year where we have budgeted 873,000.
Got it down.
Yeah, that's where it is.
Yep, okay. That was
Yeah, no,
Thank you.
because it's there's two VOAG things there.
That's what I missed.
Yeah.
That was the top end.
Yeah,
All right,
yep.
okay.
So that tuition hit is, and there's kind of no way around that. They have to abide by that, so they're stuck at the 58%. Here you go. Anyway,
Somebody whose town didn't have a VOAG program at their school.
and somebody who was paying for people to go.
Yeah.
That's what it was. Somebody who didn't have any of those schools in their district.
And wasn't there also a cut to special education, I believe?
So there's proposals around that. But, we'll see what ultimately ends up coming out of that. There was a revision to that a bit, but ultimately, again, June is when you really get, and it's not until the implementer bill hits that you really know.
Everything in there with vacation. That
Yes.
didn't pass the House.
It's very challenging.
It's very perfect.
So the very last piece of this is reserves and capital. So in the current year, you had utilized 50,000 of the winter maintenance or storm maintenance and 50,000 of the constabulary reserve to reduce mill rate. The current budget before you does not propose the utilization of reserves. That is just being able to demonstrate long-term financial stability and making sure that you're not draining reserves and tipping those in an opposite. And we'll be going over the reserves as well as to see where they are. There is stronger utilization of those reserves. So my recommendation is no utilization. You're also seeing a line that says closure of assigned general fund dash capital. So we had a number of capital projects. This was brought up during our budget, our audit the last 2 years, that we had some old capital projects that hadn't received all of their revenue. We've been working with our auditors on how we manage that closeout. There was an additional capital project that got into a closeout period that funds could reallocate within the capital in order to satisfy all of those, kind of clean the books on all of that, and get those old capital projects finally closed with the assigned revenue without having to do additional borrowing or anything like that. So this passes through. So this is only reflected as a pass-through because we have to be able to recognize it and then pass it through to the assigned capital projects. We will get to those when we get into the capital D pages. And then the last one is the recognizing that we're not utilizing any fund balance for capital projects, and we are only utilizing 500,000 for operations as opposed to 750,000. Anything else on revenue before we go to the D pages?
What
Yes, sir.
went into the fund balance? Did we have an increase in the fund balance from?
So you have the fund balance on A8 and the last white page.
Okay.
It goes over all of the fund balance. So we've been steadily since, our 2023-24, we had a $16 million fund balance. We're estimating that that's going to drop to 14.8 in the current year.
all right.
And then based on the proposal, down to 14.3.
Now, the recommended amount, if I remember right, was 16, 18? Yep. Okay. So we're still above that,
Yep, there's still a little bit of room.
a little.
And that needs to be, and I've always said this, the utilization of fund balance has to be very purposeful in looking that long term, right? And that's why I've always advocated that if you're going to use fund balance, use it for capital and not for operating, because you end up hitting a fiscal cliff at some point where, and that's why I've looked at staging down the utilization of fund balance for operational purposes as a phased down approach. Again, you could activate it for capital, you could activate it for more operational. It's just having that long-term vision of eventually you're gonna hit that cliff where you can't use fund balance anymore, and then where are you at? And gets to be a healthy amount of money that you're trying to now, that's gonna have to be borne by the mill rate all at once. And that's challenging. So if we're there, we can go to the D pages. So D1, which is town council. Town council. So really, there's only a couple of modifications here. The first one is with regards to labor. So we've added a labor line on this because, prior to 2020, the town was contracting with individuals to run and operate the AV booth. When COVID hit, we were very fortunate that we had staff because we were really struggling with, we didn't have that availability of somebody to come in and run the booth. So our staff jumped in, learned it, and they've been running it, right? However, they can't keep doing it. And so we need to contract out that service again, or have employees. So if you notice, the last couple of months, last month at least, we've had an individual that's been training in there to run the AV booth. It's not possible to run an AV booth from sitting in here. Jen is doing it by her phone right now, but it's very challenging. So it needs to be done inside the booth. So you're going to see that expenditure now hit your budget. Also, we do still have staff that are willing to participate as a backup, but we have taxed them for way too long on night meetings and pulling them away from families that they're willing to be backup, but they can't be here for every single meeting. They just physically, it's too much at this point.
So is there any way that the council members who have given up their stipend, that can be, instead of going into the fund balance, that can be transferred to pay for that service?
So that would be an activation of fund balance for operational purposes. And we did include the full value of the town council stipends in the upcoming budget because 4 of you are up for reelection. And who knows what the vision or view will be of individuals that will be seated at this table after November. So it needs to be put in there. You would have an underspend on your department budget, which means, overall, you could potentially reduce this number in a future year to acknowledge that you're not expending the full amount of the town council stipends and therefore offsetting some of this, but you wouldn't utilize the prior year to the current year.
I have a question too about the program, Mary. Like, I know the school has kids that do it. Are they involved in this at all?
So we cannot utilize students or individuals that are below the age of 18 because your typical council meetings run until almost 11 o'clock at night,
Okay,
and they're on school nights.
okay. Just trying to look a way for them to be involved and learn.
Sure, we would love to have them involved.
Also, is there any volunteer things? And I'm thinking less about the cost than, that's a really cool thing. Like, I wouldn't mind sitting in there and learning to come and do a meeting.
We attempted to try and do it was not, again,
Okay, so
it's
there's
about
no official
reliability.
thing, But if someone was interested, they could come out?
If they want to
Yeah.
reach out to the town manager's office, it's about reliability.
Okay.
We need to have people
Yeah,
that are
right.
reliably
Yeah.
able to be here for all of your meetings. It's a lot.
Oh, so you couldn't have one for one meeting and one for
No.
a different type of meeting?
No, you really need to have
Okay.
dedicated individuals. Typically, before 2020, we had 2 individuals that ran that booth at any time. Just because you end up with, somebody changes a setting, and then you got to go back and try and you need to have really good, tight coordination on this, so having a bunch of people flying through there, it would be
Too complicated.
very detrimental. The last item that I have in here that for a significant increase is with regards to contractual services, and that's related to the town manager search. I know that you've engaged with a executive search firm, and perhaps this is something that you're not going to need in the upcoming year as far as ongoing costs, but I wanted to at least acknowledge potential costs there. Any questions on town council?
I'm just thinking about that one item right there, for the contractual services on that. Because because of the contract that's in place, in a sense, there's a warranty on it, where if whoever gets hired through the process leaves within a year, then they will basically go through the search process again at no cost to the town.
The base fee would be no cost to the town. The
But
town would still have
yeah,
additional
we'd still
advertising
have
costs and things
yep,
like that.
and- Yeah, that's true, and have, for background checks, all
Mm-hmm.
that. Yeah, okay.
Any other questions on town council? Seeing none, let's go to town managers. I really don't have any modifications to town manager. I will point this out right away. It's amazing how many times we look at this document and then go, oh my God, well, how did that happen? The variance number and percentage for office supplies is looking at the wrong year. It does not impact anything with regards to the overall calculation for the current year budget or any of the B pages. I didn't pick it up, but the bottom line number of the increase of $390 is correct. So, just because that's going off of the bottom. But anyway, no, I picked that up. We'll fix that for the next round of this iteration, and I apologize. But really, no changes. The only increase in clerical, that is related to a part-time position that's in my office. That is a union position, and that is based on that union contract. But that is only a piece of that. That person is shared between 3 offices. So we maximize our utilization. She's very talented.
I think I've seen her in all 3 offices.
You have, I'm sure. She's very good. Any questions on town managers? Seeing none, we'll go over to legal. So legal, I'm actually proposing a reduction in legal. So since our switch over to Halloran and Sage, we have not had as much cost as far as legal. Their hourly rate is lower. While their hourly rate did go up slightly, they are now at $195 an hour, which is very low compared to what you see for a lot of legal firms. And Rich had great angst around making that shift too. And it had been years since they had made a shift from 185 to 195. I was like, Rich, seriously, man. We are taking the $10,000 savings. I think this year you're probably going to land at about 75,000. So I think 80,000 is pretty safe, even with a shift over in town manager. Halloran and Sage has been very efficient with their time, and they've been very, they're also very, they're very cognizant of municipal spending. And so when we may have multiple attorneys on one case or on one call, only one of them is allowed to charge the town. The other one is a no charge, right? So that's a huge benefit to the town. It keeps their firm and a backup person involved and knowledgeable about the cases that are going on. So if something happens, somebody else can step in. But we're not dealing with two charges for one attorney, for one case. We're dealing with only one attorney charge. So they've been very good. Probate, we kept that relatively the same. But, so we kept that flat. However, so in the current year, you're seeing a higher cost for probate because they're doing a capital investment in HVAC, which I had mentioned to you guys during one of my town manager reports. So I'm expecting that HVAC bid will be awarded and they will get underway with that portion of the project. We did subsequently get in, after we had already put this published or gotten this pulled together, probate finally sent us their estimate for next year. It is a little bit lower. It's like $1,200 less, so there would be a potential cut there of about $1,200 for probate based on what they just sent us.
Getting back to the legal part, now with all the issues we have with the sewer scenario.
That gets charged to the sewer department.
Okay, all right.
That's the
Like that,
WPCA's legal. That's not the general fund legal.
Okay, all right.
Good. That's a great question.
Well, some of the stuff is, but sometimes it ends up being, we do pay for it, but they reimburse us, that.
Yeah.
scenario.
So for legal bills, we directly charge the WPCA for all legal bills. So if there's legal associated to the WPCA, to working with the authority directly, evaluating any contract negotiations, all of that is related to the WPCA gets charged to the WPCA. Okay. So if we're good with legal, we'll go to town clerk. Town clerk, really the only revision here with town clerk is contractual obligation for union contract. We have one union contract that is still in place for next year. We'll be in year 2 of that contract, so that's the reflected increase. Any questions on town clerk? Hearing none, we'll go to finance, which is the next page. Finance, in the personnel, the increase there is with regards to contractual obligation. And then the, under professional services, the 5,000, that has to do with the audit. That's an increase in the cost for audit. We will be looking to have the audit presentation to you for your May special meeting. They're wrapping up and issuing, hopefully in the next couple of days, pretty much as we speak.
What was
Mike should be working on it. And then, Mike, if you're listening, you better be working on it.
so we keep getting, we're still, we should have this done in January, right, with the audit?
So
Should we just
the,
elaborate a little bit on that?
yeah, so for the audit is technically due December 31st for the previous fiscal year. First round of extension gets you to January 31st. We've been on multiple extensions, and this has been several years. There has There's been some challenges with having on the, and I will largely say at the school side of them having their financial documents ready for the auditors to come out and audit. The auditors are not going to schedule the town for an audit if the documents aren't ready. They're not. There's plenty of other towns to get done. There's been a significant shift in how many auditors, municipal audit firms are available in the state, and qualified municipal auditors are shrinking. And so they're busy. So they're going to go to the towns and to the clients that are ready for them. And the town, Killingly, has not been ready for them. And largely that has been due to the Board of Ed not having closed out their financials. And in order for the town to finish getting our side of our work done and closed out and reconciled, the Board of Ed has to get reconciled and closed out. So we're behind because we can't get the stuff from them. And you know, everybody is busy. Everybody has stuff going on. I'm not trying to, you know, be detrimental or speak down on the Board of Education. It's just, that's just the snowball effect that's happening. And so we are delayed in getting that audit completed and getting the auditors out here. So that's where we're at. You know, I would love to be able to say we're going to be able to move that needle. I know that Jen has, and the finance department on the town side has done a number of steps to try and push those processes on the school finance side to a different timeline with limited success.
So,
When are we getting, so by 12/31, how long is it taking them to get it to us?
We just got information from them about 3 weeks ago.
so what is the holdup? Like, every month you have to close out invoices, you have to balance your books, like, you have to make.
Reconciliation has
How are they
been-
this far behind?
We
How many
didn't,
years
we
in a row
didn't,
now?
we didn't get what we needed to start making some of our final entries until middle of December. And then there was still rounds of entries that were happening up until end of January, early February.
They did hire another secretary that was supposed to improve that process.
Yeah, for close to $100,000, and that was what, 2 years ago? The part-time for, was it 3?
So
This is
it's just been a challenge. I don't, you know,
I think Keeley was out too for a while, and that might have affected some of that. Some of those things might have been picked up.
But they did hire the other secretary
Yeah,
that
they
was.
hired an
No,
assistant
but-
for Christine.
wonder about the shifting of duties.
yeah. And I don't know how much of that has occurred. And, you know, if they've had other, like, you know, staff vacancies or people out for long periods, you know, there's a lot of things that can impact whether or not somebody has time to dive into the prior year reconciliation. But it has definitely, you know, we're not gaining traction at this point in time. So that's why you're not getting it until May. And that's also another reason why we're only issuing notes at this point in time, because if you were to go and issue bonds, you don't have an audit yet, and you won't get a credit rating. So we need to issue notes right now, so that way financially you guys are good on a cash basis. But hopefully by October, you will be able to issue bonds. Any other questions on that one?
Also, I'll just say that, you know, we see him Tuesday, so
Yes.
everybody can say what's going on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sue will be able to speak to this. So any other questions on finance? Seeing none, we'll move over to the assessors. The assessors department, there's really not really any substantial change. It's overall $700, largely due to printing and postage, and that really just relates to the actual grand list itself, and the costs, the increased costs around the printing of the grand list, and then what they have to send out for notifications for changes, and postage is projected to go up. So we are going to begin the review process of applicants for the assessor, but we didn't make any, clearly made no modification with that. Any questions on assessor? Seeing none, we'll go to revenue collection. Revenue collection, with regards to salary, that is all union negotiation. That's all union contracts, in order to be able to satisfy those union contracts. So that's all contractually obligated. Wage increases, the next block, contractual services. There's kind of some shifting around here, but printing, the current year, we had kind of 2 years of printing, if you will. Typically, what we do is we issue the purchase order for our printing of our bills in June, because usually our printing of our bills happen in June. This year, the printing of our bills happened later than that. So you end up with almost like a double effect that happened in the current year. But overall, when we look at that, we see that it looks like in the upcoming year, the printing will be less. So that's why you're seeing a reduction there. Postage and delivery, though, we're seeing that as an uptick. That's going up. And so it's kind of like this shift. Now, I will say it's all QDS that does this, right? They send out the bills, they print the bills, right? So, but this is all based on the quote that we're getting from them. And then they were able to reduce professional development. Most of their stuff they've been able to do online, and they've been free, so they haven't had to pay for professional development. We've eliminated transportation. Again, that's largely just due to the fact that most of it's been online. And when they do have to go somewhere, we have them utilize one of the fleet vehicles, so we're not paying for mileage for any of that. And that's just, in line with what we do with all of our other departments. So overall, there's an increase to this budget, but again, largely that is because of contractual union wage increases.
But the printing has a bearing on the budget, so if the budget doesn't pass, we go through multiple cycles, that's when the printing cost goes to the,
Well,
that's where the cost goes to the next year.
yeah, I mean, typically we've tried to at least purchase order it in the June, because especially if it's gonna happen right at that year-end June to beginning of July timeframe, we try and purchase order it, but,
So you know what the cost will be?
yes.
Okay. 'cause it's
Because
not-
we usually have the majority of the file
Okay,
prepped and ready, so we pretty much know that.
try to pre-buy the printing cost, that's the,
Well,
yeah,
we have to
keep it-
we have to get it queued in for production.
Right.
So the purchase order kind of holds our spot in line, otherwise we get delayed further.
Now, for revenue collection, I know the borough pays a fee,
Yep,
which shows up in the revenue pages, correct?
right. And South Killingley also,
South
this
Killingley,
year
the
will be the
fire
first
district,
year
yeah.
for South Killingley's collection with our revenue. So if you were to look, and I didn't highlight that, the revenue line for district collections has an increase in it, and that's because we're recognizing the borough as well as South Killingley.
No other fire districts have taken you up?
Attawagan has approached us, and so they're reviewing the contract right now to see if it's something that they would want to participate in. And then, but that ultimately has to come to the council.
Yeah.
And that clearly wouldn't be for this upcoming year. It takes a year for implementation, so we wouldn't do that for July. It would be a subsequent year for Attawagan. All right, ready to go to registrations and elections? 2 words, early voting. So, first of all, salary administration, that is just your registrars. That is the 2 registrars. They are currently paid a stipend. They met with our fiscal subcommittee, right? Fiscal subcommittee, I can't remember which subcommittee now. They met with fiscal subcommittee to go over why they were proposing you know, a 30% increase in their stipend, and it's really around the, there's a lot more hours and work that they're required to do now based on the new early voting and the registrar requirements, right? So they did do a market analysis to determine what everybody else was getting paid, and so this was their proposal. I took no action on their proposal. I had them come before fiscal subcommittee. Their direction basically was to incorporate the ask as was for the whole council to deliberate on that. And then election poll workers, that's directly just early voting. I know that there is some legislation proposals out there around doing some level of funding for early voting, and I'm not sure if that's going to grow some legs or not.
So for the public, would you say what the total amount is the impact to the town and actually other municipalities too for basically this unfunded mandate?
Yes, I mean, it really is. Early voting is an unfunded mandate, and it doesn't appear that there's support from our state administration to provide any funding this year to offset those costs, or this upcoming year to offset those costs.
Is there numbers at least that the state shows? Like, obviously, early voting, you're trying to get voter participation, which is good. But has there been an uptick in percentage?
No,
So we're mandated, but there's no uptick in the amount of people voting.
correct. There was no increase in the total voter percentages when you looked at, a typical election or a typical vote process to what occurred in totality with early voting. There was no increase in percentage.
And how long? How long is this?
This current fiscal year was the first year that they implemented early voting. So this will be our second year that we're in early voting. We did also put in, the municipalities have been pushing hard on trying to reduce the number of days even for early voting. 2 weeks is a long time for
Yes.
early voting. And 2 weekends is a long time. I mean, most polling places saw barely anybody over the weekends. And so,
And the travesty is the lines that were on election day.
right. And so, we really tried to push to shorten that. No appetite at the state level for shortening, or with our legislators for shortening that early voting time period. There was some appetite that they wanted to lengthen it, and we're like, you're crazy. And we're just struggling to get people to man the polls for that time frame. It's a
Right.
long time frame. So it's been a huge hardship. And a lot of the state doesn't have any desire to shorten that at all. One of the other challenges that we faced with the early voting was that the early voting went through the Sunday before elections. Monday, there was no early voting. Tuesday was when everybody went to vote. Well, and that's designed by purpose, because Monday, they have to basically rerun all of their voting lists to make sure that anybody that came for early voting doesn't show up at the polling place, right? So you need that 24-hour time span where they can reconverge everything and make sure that, by Tuesday, they have, the lists. There was a lot of people that showed up very angry on Monday that they weren't able to vote on that Monday. And it was just the messaging, right? Nobody really articulated well that Monday, there was no voting that could occur on that Monday. And so we had more people show up on that Monday than over the weekends. And we were told them, you got to come back on Tuesday, So that was definitely a challenge, but they have to have that 24-hour period to make sure that the list for Tuesday is ready, and nobody has that,
I understand
that gap.
I understand the premise, but if there's no increase,
Nope.
and if you think of the way people are today, anytime I'll just use a work example. Anytime there's a promotion or there's anything going on, the consumer waits till the last day.
Yeah.
They don't take advantage of it, even if it's the same price. They hold on to their money. They hold on to their vote till the end.
Yep.
And I mean, I hope if this goes a second year and there's no increase, there's some common sense. It seems extremely wasteful.
We're talking Hartford here.
I know, I know. I mean, I get it. It just, I mean, at some point, if you, you can say it's the first year, but when you're seeing no increase, I hope the towns push back, because that makes, there's just no common sense in it.
And one of the other modifications that was made for voting was that they also now allow absenteeisms that doesn't have a limitation, right? That any reason. So before, you only could pull an absentee if you were going to be out of town, or if you were, sick, homebound, whatever, right? Like, you had to have specific criteria. Now, it's no excuse absenteeism. So you can pull an absentee ballot at any time. So why do you need to do early voting, right? If it just that the voting time is not conducive to your work time or your schedule for that day, just pull an absentee ballot and do an absentee ballot before the election. We've approached that and said, look, if you're going to do this, then why do the early voting? It was nope.
What was the cost to the town for just the early voting?
Yeah, so if you look at with the budget itself in front of you, we're looking at increasing the budget by $41,000. And that's largely all early vote. That's all early voting.
And what is the state's reimbursement?
None. None. For the upcoming year will be none.
Will the budget vote have early voting, or is that just for municipal elections?
No, it's the elections. The budget vote doesn't have early voting because there's not time for that, right? Because of the timing of when changes could take. So local referendums are exempt from the early voting. It is elections that have early voting. Yes.
But even talking to some individuals, it's funny, I came into the town hall that Saturday. I don't know why, it was open. I said, let's stop in, see what's going on. There was a majority of people that just happened to see the sign at the library,
Yep.
and they came by. It was like the promotion, you're saying about a promotion. There was no promotion, but we spent, what are you saying, $40,000, $41,000, and
It's interesting. We had Spooktacular on the weekend before, during this early voting period. So we had Spooktacular. We had how many people out on Main Street?
Thousands.
And up in Davis Park, right? We had a ton of people, right? And I was actually out here in front of Town Hall for a good portion of that event. And people would come by, and we had the sign right out in front that said, early voting, right? Today, right? The voting was there. And I had a couple of people that were like, oh, well, do you think there's a line? I'm like, no, I'm positive there's not a line. And they were like, oh, I guess maybe I'll go up and do it. But like, if I had said, oh, yeah, there's a line, they would have just kept walking, right? If they thought there was a line. The first day we had a line, but that line lasted not even a half an hour. Once they opened up, right? People came in about an hour before the actual early voting poll opened up. Once they opened that thing up, it was a half an hour. That whole line that went all the way down the hallway, cleared completely out. After that, we never really had a line.
Maybe
The
like
entire time.
the first 2 mornings, right
Yes.
around the time they opened, and then after that, there was no more lines.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then election day, the line was there all day.
Yes.
It goes so against our human nature and how busy people are. This is not, they're trying to make it convenient.
Yes.
But I think they're missing how people are moving at warp speed. Even we're in a quieter area, never mind a city environment.
Yeah.
This is not what they're gonna do. It's
I
wasteful.
mean, they really need to
Wasteful
find
spending.
a technology way to vote that's secure.
But that
You
won't
know,
be
but
for
they're
a
not,
long
but
time.
that's not gonna be around for a long time,
Yeah.
so.
No.
Yeah.
They've tried it out in other states and it hasn't had enough trust, so.
Yep. So that's where we're at with voter registration. Any other questions on that one? If not, we'll move on to town commissions and service agencies. I did. So town commissions and service agencies, this is really your boards and commissions. That's what really this is. Department 9, we have an increase in zoning board of appeals. We've seen an uptick in applications for zoning board of appeals. We expect that to kind of continue, so we're mirroring what we expect to expend in the current year to next year. You have ironically, you have a same dollar value decrease in permanent building commission, and that is largely because in previous years, they have been staffed with their own secretary that was being paid. Mary Brom is the town staff liaison. She's been doing the minutes. The secretary there stepped down some while ago. Mary Brom's doing it. So you don't pay her to do that. She just does it. So there's a savings there. The temporary commissions is increased, and that's for the vision committee. You have your vision committee that's organizing. They will need to have a secretary that I'm pretty positive will need to be paid for. $4,000 for that. I didn't include any additional costs on that because really everything is quite unknown with regards to what they're going to be looking at doing, and some of the costs that I had gotten from some of the consultants that could be used to kind of help navigate some of that were rather high. And so I didn't incorporate any of those either without first having the vision committee organize and then have a conversation with them. So I think that's going to be a future conversation the council may want to have with the vision committee and see what their ask might be. But for right now, this is really just covering, potentially some advertising and then a secretary to manage their meetings.
And on the housing authority, that's the sewer issue. We
That's
pay
the
in
sewer.
advance and they reimburse us.
Correct.
To give them a chance to.
Yes.
Because that was the thing with them.
So that's how much we paid for their sewer bills in the current year.
Right.
They're getting billed next year for
Right,
that.
right.
Yes. Yep. We're gonna flip to planning and development. Really, the only changes within planning and development are union contractual obligations, and then with regards to overtime, and that is just, the overtime is largely staffing the boards and commissions. This one department has the most boards and commissions that it staffs. And so Allison and Jonathan staff a number of those, and that they are eligible for overtime. But no other changes throughout that department. Any questions? Seeing none, we'll go to Department 11, which is info technology. This is computers, all things computers. So contractual services support, we have a $27,000 increase there, and that is twofold. One, we are going to have to transition to Windows 11. We're very sad about that. That's going to be more expensive, of course. Secondly, Novus does have an increase in their costs. So Novus, we've been very fortunate with our IT network support provider, Novus. They are so diligent and very, very concerned about municipal spending. And so they've tried to hold down their costs for as long as possible. We've seen no increases on them for at least the last 4 years. They need to increase. They've had a significant increase in wage costs in order to be able to retain and attract staff. And so they have to adjust their cost. We do have a reduction, though, in telephone. So that is just continued savings that we're seeing by going to the VoIP platform that we're using, as opposed to the hard lines that we previously had. This is the voice over IP system.
Where does Channel 22 come in? Is that in this?
We don't pay for Channel 22.
Well, but I
That's the
mean,
problem.
How do we light a fire or something? Because
So we do have, Novus has been working with us for a capital project that will do some additional renovations in the AV room that you guys aren't really going to see, but everybody else will notice, right? So with that, they've been coordinating with the Channel 22 provider in order to be able to upgrade that system at the same time. So there is some coordination. That is expected to happen in the June timeframe?
Yeah, there was a little bit of delays in getting some of the pieces that we needed. So, and there's going to be probably some more direct connections in the crossover. So We were hoping to do it by May, but it's looking more like June. We've also applied for another round of the PEG PISA funding, so
Yeah.
that might also determine on how far we can go. If we can make the upgrade a little more robust, we're going to try to. So we're kind of got all that kind of going at the same time.
Yeah.
So.
So that was all part of the PEG PISA grant.
Because there's a couple of times I'm sitting here and I'm getting a few phone calls that people were watching it, Channel 22, online, everything went down. And it's
Yes,
like, how do
and it
we-
still is happening that way. This is the connection that we have within our booth to the Channel 22 network is, it's old and it is not functioning. So we lose that stream pretty regularly. I don't even know that it's up at the moment right now. We're focusing on Facebook because that we know we have a consistent stream on. The Channel 22 one, we make sure that we rebroadcast. So everything that we have recorded, we rebroadcast because we don't seem to have the challenges with rebroadcasting, but going live, that box, it's a box. Can't wait until they don't have that.
The only
dang
place we
box.
can actually get the parts to replace the box is on eBay, and they're very old. So,
Sounds like the
And-
community center.
So it's
I-
DOS based.
I will say this, at the last Cable Advisory Committee meeting, we're not the only town that has that issue.
Yeah.
So it's out there, okay.
And it's mind numbing. I swear,
they're
I had
not-
wanted this conversation about Channel 22 over a long time ago.
But they're not regulated by Pura or anybody. That's
Nope.
the other thing too. They got, because I called Pura 2 years ago. Oh, we haven't overseen them in
For
how
a long
many
time,
years?
a long
Yes.
time.
And it's like,
We don't want Pure overseeing them. You see what the electric rates are.
well,
Right.
I mean, yes and no. You're right.
But it is, so I will say that Novus has been doing really good at communicating and connecting with our service provider and continuing to push and poke and, we're going to have somebody out. They've been able to get them to come out and evaluate and do quotes around what it would look like for them to do the upgrades and really go through the kind of the nitty gritty background of what needs to happen. So I'm going to let Novus continue to have that direct line with them because they seem to get the most production from that conversation. But it seems as though for right now we are pretty coordinated for this upgrade.
Well, Jason, when you go to the meeting, so what happens? Are they?
Well, here's the thing I will say is one thing that, bringing up Novus, I'm almost wondering if it would be worthwhile for me to have a conversation with Novus, so then when I'm at Cable Advisory Committee and the guy from BreezeLine is there, I can turn and say, hey.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe that's a good conversation to have. We're hoping they're coming to the. Yeah, so we are hoping that we will be having Novus at so Novus has also been working on a back-end report with regards to cyber and our overall network health. That is an item that would be within executive session to the town council because of security purposes. And we're hoping that will be happening at your April meeting. So that way you'll
Okay.
have a better, more robust understanding of potential investment as well as just general overall health of the back end of the systems. I think that's important for you to understand and know.
Okay, and that would work, because the next Cable Advisory Committee meeting isn't until May anyway.
Yes, so
it
it'll
would
work
give us some
well.
time to have that conversation.
I'm just waiting for them to confirm because they're bringing somebody special from their team in for that, and we're making sure that they can align for the April meeting or not. So
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So if we're good with info technology, we will go to the town hall building. Town hall building, so we have, our biggest adjustment here is electricity. So if you note, in the current year, we are expecting to exceed our current electrical by 10,000. So our electric, we had dropped in the previous year because of the removal of, or the shutting down of the EV charging station, but more importantly, because we were having PD move over into their own building. That didn't happen for July 1, that happened later in the year. So we did have this building activated over the weekends, far more than what we had originally anticipated. Even with that, we still seem to be having a lot of weekend activity here at the town hall. So we have staff that's coming in on the weekends. We have training events that are happening on the weekends. We have these that are happening on the weekends, right? So there's been more activity on the weekends, which is, and that coupled with our lovely Eversource price increasing, right? While we did have some reduction in the overall usage of electricity with PD moving to their own building, the cost and increase that we've incurred has outweighed that benefit. And so the proposal that I have before you is $4,000, and I did bring that down from the current year only because we are going to try and do some more tightening of time windows with regards to our heating and cooling system for shutting them down and turning them on at different times to be able to hopefully not have them on for as long, especially over weekends, being able to kind of tighten that range. So we're working on that, and hopefully we'll be able to have that ironed out. But there is an increase to this budget largely due to that. Any questions on this one?
Like, we had the elevator out, is there a higher end maintenance agreement or something with that?
We have our ongoing maintenance agreement with them, and I forgot to double check with Dave. He was supposed to be getting a report from them around capital investment over the next 5 years. And I have not seen that report, so I will have to get that from Dave, but I don't know. We didn't have anything planned for the upcoming year for capital investment on the elevator. So I think they were really looking at in 5 years what we would need to get done.
Because that was inconvenient, I mean, it was.
Inconvenient was not the word for that.
I'm gonna be nice, so.
I will tell you, there's a few staff members that would say it was way worse than inconvenient.
There was no increase in their baseline maintenance contract, and they still have to get back to us on that, as Mary mentioned, that 5-year capital investment, so.
So we're still waiting on
But
that.
that's what I'm saying, even maybe the capital investment, but a higher end maintenance, just, I don't know.
There's not another tier up for maintenance
okay,
on this. There really isn't. It's not like we go from, the silver level to the gold level, right? That doesn't exist.
What about,
Because
like,
of the age of our elevator, there's just only so much they can do, so I'm just not gonna say much more than that.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, what about, and you might already have this, do you have a CNR for spare parts or anything like that? Was there a lead time
They-
that caused us?
So there was a lead time with
Yeah.
regards to one of with the hydraulic pumps. Again, that's due to the age of the equipment, right? But they were able to shrink that down. We have had a conversation with them with regards to spare parts, but at the same time, that's not something you would just hold in a spare part. I mean, it's just not something they're willing to hold either. So,
And on
We'll see.
our end,
Oh,
you
yeah.
have the CNR and you have your redundant thing right
Yep.
there. Yeah,
yep,
Might be
yeah.
something.
I'll talk to Dave.
Now, while we're on the town hall building, I know there'd been discussion in the past about putting, especially since we lost the overflow room here, about possibly putting a screen downstairs away to where, and it would have worked in a situation with the elevator if we had 102 downstairs able to receive the signal and a
Yeah.
microphone down at a broadcast up to here.
Yeah, that's something that we were going to be looking at with one of the upcoming PEGPESA grants with putting in because we would also need to put a camera down there and then get a feed from there up to here so that way you could also see if somebody was making public comment, right? So downstairs, we largely, if somebody is going remote, we largely utilize the OWL, which is a portable projection system that we utilize. But we have started to kind of explore what that may look like.
Yeah, you'd also need like almost like a mini control station down there. Not nearly as robust, obviously, what's up here. So we started looking at what the components are to do that. And then they decided that they would need to be another upgrade to the equipment up here first.
Right.
Part of what's being upgraded in here will allow some of that camera control to be done remotely. So the vision is that will be able to connect.
Okay.
So, yeah.
And we also have to make sure that we can secure the equipment that would be down in the in 102 as well. That room is far more accessible to the public. It's also utilized as our warming area for when we have, when we have really cold snaps. And we have a lot of outside agencies that use 102. It's not just the town that is utilizing 102. That is a very regularly booked room for community agencies as well. So, if you have to have a separate control panel down there, you have to have a way to secure all of that and all that kind of stuff. So, again, could be done. It's just things you have to think through and what investment you need to make in being able to make that to be kind of like that portable, that satellite location for this room.
But we have so far have had success with the PEGPESA grant, so there is potential.
If you wouldn't mind me taking a 2-second break, that would be helpful.
That's fine.
Okay, thank you.
I can go for some more coffee.
Yeah, I'm gonna go. So we had quite a discussion with the Board of Ed.
If we need to make more.
So I think it's resolved now.
What did they decide?
I think she's gonna withdraw her name.
You know what's funny? You know what I liked about it? I could see both sides of the argument.
It's,
So to me, I am not all the way to the left. I don't follow the party. There's probably 20% of things I don't agree with least. And I think we have some that are, they're far, like to me, when you get extreme far.
but the thing was, that you have to be a Democrat. And the time to do it, I think it's 3 months. You can't just change.
No, it was hard because remember, so like I look at Misty, and we know, I know Misty just a little bit. We've known her, but we're not tight with her.
Right.
But she's a true, not affiliated.
Tammy, did you come right from work today?
She's a true Republican.
Well, but
Well, I had to
but
stop. I had to feed
but the rules
dogs.
with that were different
And then let the dogs
because
out.
Mine
in
were
this
mad at me
case,
this
you
morning
have
because
to
I didn't
be
get to sit with
of
them.
the party.
Right.
No, I
Right.
come home, that's the first I unlock the door,
Good morning.
think I'm charging out. Charge out into the breezeway.
Oh, yeah, because we took a break, but we're still live. Remember that. We took a break, but we're still live.
At some point. Because when I'm doing a Zoom and he's talking, and if I'm out traveling for business, I can never hear it.
Finally.
So we're back. We're on Department 13, Economic Development. She's made a reduction to the professional development request. And so it's largely what she has in there is really just association dues. She's not really planning on all the conferences that she's been going to will be free this year. There was a national conference that she went to previously, so that's the reduction there. Any questions on economic development?
But with the issue with the sewer department, how do we move with economic development? It's like, how do we?
It's a tightrope there.
I know, I'm trying to bring it out there to light a fire somehow. How can economic development get to the sewer authority? You know, we're losing so much.
Yeah, but there's more to the economic development and what Jill is doing than just, trying to recruit in or attract new businesses. This is also about business retention. This is about supporting existing businesses. Right, this is trying to, assist our existing businesses, trying to connect them with workforce. There's a lot of additional components to that as well, too. But, she tries to be very cognizant of, resources. And I will say Jill is amazing at finding grant opportunities and trying to seek out grant funding for providing for new opportunities.
If she ever
And most
needed
of the new businesses are going into existing buildings that should
Yes.
already have.
And she's been trying to really work on infill, right? One of her main objectives, one of her main focuses for the town since she's been with the town since May of 2020 was the infill of Main Street, right? And really focusing on trying to get that. And that's a long-term process. Just is, so.
It's just a matter of changing people's perspectives and thought processes.
Right, but it's also, a lot of those spaces are smaller spaces, so you end up with smaller retailers, smaller businesses, and smaller businesses have different challenges than large corporate, right? And they are more susceptible to market changes, they're more susceptible to inflationary pressures, things like that. So it's a lot harder for the smaller business to stay in business. So you see a lot of shifting in that in, just over a couple of years. So trying to be able to be supportive of that of that group takes a lot of efforts.
After the KVA was here and had a presentation and they had discussed about the cameras, is that anything,
Capital projects.
capital projects? Okay,
Capital projects.
thank you.
Do you have anything on the building on Main Street that was closed down because it's unsafe? Was it the one that Maury's Pub was in?
So that's privately owned. They're still working through insurance and what they're looking at doing for ultimately renovations within that. That condition really hasn't changed at this point.
If Jill ever needed a new job, grant writing would be,
She's so good at it.
she is really.
She's very good at it.
And is there any kind of movement with PRIMS?
So EPA and Connecticut Deep, largely EPA, they've been monitoring some of the monitor wells through there. There is some movement that they're making with regards to that. We did get PRIMS as part of the Yukon evaluation, so similar to what we just did with Blueville and what we have Bailey Hill Mill going through. We're also getting PRIM into that as well too. So yeah, I think we're starting to get definitely a lot more engagement from EPA and Connecticut Deep on those sites. And it does, there's the process for them, but I think we're starting to get there with that one. Any other on economic development budget? Okay, we'll go over to highway supervision. The reduction in overtime on highway supervision is really being able to, remove the, some of the overtime related to storm purposes for our assistant highway director, putting those into the storm maintenance. And this really then leaves us with just what I would consider construction overtime, right? For our, for our assistant superintendent. I will say Rob is, just a very, diligent. Matt and Rob are very, very diligent. I want to, give them the shout out with regards to the dredging of the Owen Bell Pond.
That came out really well.
Came out wonderful.
Really well.
But-
Yes, everybody, yep.
This really, I think, demonstrated their dedication to the community in that Rob came in every weekend, all weekend long, just to check to see whether or not turtles were by the fence. And he was the one that said, you know what, as we move the fish to the other side where we've dredged, we now have to feed them. He came in every weekend and he fed those fish to make sure that we weren't going to lose fish. He didn't charge the town for that. He didn't get paid overtime for that. He just came in. He came in, he brought his grandchild to go get an ice cream, and while they were there, they went and had to go check everything. That's what they did. And it wasn't about getting paid from the town. It was about making sure that the wildlife was safe, that the project itself was okay, and that it was going to be a good product, right? Like, they were just that invested. And so it's a huge shout out to them for watching, but that was I think, a very good public demonstration of the commitment of that staff in not wanting to just nickel and dime the town for everything that they could. They came in hours, many of them. They would stop at the park just to go walk around it and check on it, Not because they were getting paid, not because I got called in, but just because they needed to go check on it and they wanted to make sure that everything was okay. They did a phenomenal job. But so this $5,000 that is in the budget is really what I would consider our construction related, because there are times in the construction cycle when, 3:30 may come, but you are not done leaving that site, right? And you got to wrap it up. And Rob, being the assistant superintendent, he's got one of the major crews. He is going to wrap that up. So we do have that. Other than that, the only other change to this really is the increase in due to CNR, and that is, we did have to replace one of those trucks. Unfortunately, those trucks came in at higher than what the old trucks were from 10 years ago by a lot, which we all know that market pressure. So this is it is strictly just the depreciation value on those vehicles. Any question on highway supervision? Hearing none, we'll go to engineering and facilities. Overall, not a significant change with engineering and facilities on this one. We have some shifts between, one, having more of a stronger market cost and savings in other locations. So professional development, we do have a savings on that. Again, they've been able to get a lot of their continuing education virtually, with no cost associated to that, and just kind of shifting the. We have the repair, maintenance, and operating supplies. We're not using as much operating supplies, but we do have a stronger cost for repair and maintenance. The repair and maintenance supplies, that is largely our facility maintainers. So outside of what they do for capital projects, but when they redo some of our spaces or have to change out lights and stuff like that, that all comes out of this, which is a pretty small amount there. Any questions on engineering? Hearing none, we're going to go to central garage. Central garage, we have a small reduction in contractual services support, and that's largely just driven by what our historical spend is going to be and based on what we're seeing for our actual contracts of what we're going to be expending on. The other changes, lubricants and tires, we are seeing a stronger increase in those in market cost. So that's why the increase in that. But overall, no major shift on this one.
Could you tell me, Mary, with that, I'm just curious, do you get 3 quotes? Do you always stay with the same vendor?
Oh, no, we get 3 quotes. If it's over $1,000, it's required to have 3 quotes attached unless they're purchasing from the state bid. Yep, it's required.
What is the price again that the town paid to lock in for the fuel now that the fuel costs are going down?
I know we have a savings in our fuel, but I can't remember what it is off the top of my head. We'll get that at lunch. How's that?
We lock in at a specific price, but then also the taxes and fees are added on to it too. There's certain still, we pay minimal tax, but there's still some like federal taxes that are still there, so. They call it a tax, even though we're exempt from tax, there's still some,
We're exempt from sales tax,
yeah,
not all taxes.
not all taxes. There's still it's like a recovery and spillage fee is really what it is, but we can get that at lunch.
Any other questions on central garage? Hearing none, we'll go to highway maintenance. Highway maintenance, really the big shift here, sand and gravel. We're looking at utilizing that out of the capital projects. This is really more for the incidental use, what I would say, for sand and gravel. The other thing is the calcium. We've eliminated the calcium out of here, and that is now being paid for out of our unimproved town aid road money because that can be utilized for the maintenance of our dirt roads. So we're paying for that out of our unimproved town road money, as well as some of the sand and gravel is also out of our unimproved with regards to maintenance of those dirt roads. Traffic control supplies, that's just an increasing cost for those signs, the sign blanks that we get. We're very fortunate in that we make our own signs. Not a lot of highway departments, especially of our size, has the capability of making all of our traffic and roadway signs. We're very fortunate that we have that capability, which means we're not having to buy pre-made signs or having to have somebody make the signs for us. We just have to buy the blanks, and we buy the reflective supplies and the vinyl for it. Significantly less expensive than having to buy all pre-made signs. So we're fortunate in that, but there is an increased cost to those blanks. And then with the due to CNR, that increase is really just driven, that's just the depreciation. We did have some changeover. We bought a new plow truck. So the old plow truck had a lower value. And then obviously we don't have any proposals for any new equipment. We're going to go to highway storm maintenance next. So highway storm maintenance, really the big conversation here is with regards to salt and calcium. So we really reduced the amount that we were proposing to utilize out of the operating budget for salt for this current year, and expecting that we were going to need to rely on the reserve for utilization, which I can tell you that we are going to be utilizing the reserve. We we still have material events that are going to be happening, which means they're going to have to still go out and salt for at least another month. Sometimes it goes into May. We're not going to have that in May this year. I don't want to have that in May, but it has happened. So we have about 100,000 in salt that is going to be paid for out of the reserve for the current year. We also have overtime. If you recall at the last town council meeting when we reviewed the financials, we had a overage in the amount of overtime that we have expended in the current year. Most of our storms have been on the weekends this year, and on holidays. Yay. So we have not had as many that have occurred during a normal traditional workday. So we've exceeded the overtime. So both of those things have already gone to storm management, So the proposal that's before you, the department head, Matt had actually proposed the full value of what a traditional winter, as far as tonnage is concerned for salt, to be in the operating budget, as he should propose. You should be budgeting for what you expect you're going to use on an average year, which is about 2,500 to 3,000 ton of salt in a given year. I've reduced that a bit because I have based it on the amount that we still have remaining in reserves, as well as the amount that we expect to end the year with for salt storage. We have been very specific about making sure that when we end the year with almost full storage units of salt, because we have had years that that has saved us. When we get into the winter season, we have had many of our neighboring towns scrambling to find salt in order to treat roads, and we've not been under that pressure. We've also been able to better manage market conditions with regards to that. So it is important that we go into the season with well-stocked salts, so we are not scrambling. We've had many towns around us struggle with that. So that is, again, one of that preemptive long-term planning that we use to be able to be as responsive as possible to storms. So while he has proposed 265,000, which would be the equivalent of what we expect the salt costs to be, the other component with regards to the salt that is driving a bit of the price, and it's not a significant increase in cost, but it is an increase in cost. He really would like to see the town move to more consistently utilizing treated salt. That treated salt does a couple of different things. Number one, it works in a wider range of temperature. So the lower temperatures, and we typically right now kind of make our own treated salt in those instances. But to be able to go to purchasing treated salt and using it on a regular basis. Secondly, treated salt comes with a conditioner in it, if you will, that reduces the rusting, right? It's a rust inhibitor that is included in that, which is incredibly important, not just for town fleet, right? Obviously, we're out in it all the time, and salt is incredibly corrosive. But it also gives longevity to our own residential vehicles, right? Our own personal vehicles, because it would have a rust inhibitor in it, right? So that is an avenue that was part of his proposal for the 265,000. I've reduced that down to 200,000, which is still an $86,000 increase in ask from the current year. But again, that's trying to move that to represent more closely what is an actual operational year for salt consumption, and then utilizing the reserve for those emergent events that occur, large-scale type events that we would have to potentially do significant, like if we have significant snowfall and you have to start shoveling off or snow blowing roofs again. Those were incredibly expensive. We haven't seen a year like that, but that's not to say that, we're not going to see that next year or the year after that. The reserve balance that we're at right now for storm maintenance after the current year is about 191,000. I will tell you right now, to shovel off the roofs, we expended about $150,000 to shovel off roofs in one season. So while you have money in that reserve, that can go incredibly fast when you're utilizing it and expecting to utilize it for ongoing operations of a regular, traditional, average New England winter. So that's why my request is at the 200,000.
Let me ask you, Mary, with the 200,000, that's, you're estimating a little less time, but you're still thinking the treated salt?
I would like to see more treated salt. So it may be like, a blend of that where we're starting to move towards that, but without moving all of it to that. So yeah, I would really like to see the town move to treated salt. I think it makes a lot of sense economically
So cost-wise, how much more, or is it pretty comparable?
It's fairly comparable. The treated salt was only about 5% more, I think, for overall for treated salt. So it's wasn't a strong cost factor. The biggest cost factor here that you're seeing is we really removed a lot of tonnage that we would normally buy in operations for winter, and we expected to use the reserve. The contemplation was that the reserve was just, we had going into the year, we had 379,000 in reserve balance. So it was purposefully using that reserve as opposed to budgeting for it within the mill rate. I think you've gotten to, this past year, we had a really strong year for material use. We're going to have used a full 3,000 ton of salt, which is pretty average. We're also using about 50,000 in, you also transferred 50,000 of that reserve fund balance into the operating revenue this past year. So you drained 50,000 right out of that fund and put it as a revenue in order to be able to offset mill rate. We're using 100,000 for salt, and we're also using about almost 40,000 for overtime right now out of that fund. So it very quickly drops $188,000 out of that fund. And so you're down to, 191 in that fund, estimated as to where we're going to close out. I would say that you would probably not want to drop much below that from an operational standpoint in order to be able to be responsive to any major issues that would occur or major storms.
Do we do any outside contracting, like in combination with our guys?
We do not.
You do not?
Is there any, as far as storing the rust inhibitor salt, we gotta separate that in the salt storage bin? How is that? Is that a problem? We gotta do another structure?
No, we don't need to do another structure. Matt feels that they can accommodate that appropriately within the existing facilities.
And then having the salt storage structure, we're not you catch it on the news and they're saying, during the storm, they're at all the depots, that the lineup is 8 hours to get
Oh,
loaded.
we're very fortunate that we
So
don't have to do that.
We have it in the bin, and then we can refill the bin in the off hours, not right,
Yeah.
immediately. We're not in the overtime. You're
Yeah.
spending more hours waiting in line to get loaded, so we've done pretty good in that
Yeah.
regard.
And we also utilize 2 facilities for salt, right? So we do utilize New London, and they deliver, New Haven, they deliver the salt to us, so that's with delivery. The other one in Rhode Island that we utilize, we have to go pick up. But again, because we're not slammed for high pressure of having to get product out here, and because we regularly utilize them, we can get that without being in their peak lineup. And also, if there is a shortage in salt, a couple of years ago, there was a big problem with salt shortage. They fill their existing customers first. So by maintaining that relationship, we maintain a secondary supply or supplier of salt when another one may be really challenged with bringing in salt. So it's important to maintain those 2 relationships.
Now, I have one question as far as keeping the treated salt on site. Now, is that above the aquifer?
No, because this is at a different site. It's not at the
Okay.
highway department.
Oh, okay, all right.
Yep, we don't keep it there.
I don't know why they transitioned from the state and towns from just straight salt. When they combined it with sand, obviously your salt stretched further and sand's cheaper than the salt.
Well, the reason why they eliminated the ability for us to use sand is because of the sedimentation in the rivers and the sediment and contamination of the rivers. So they felt that the sand was then washing into the waterways and silting. So there was silting that was occurring within the waterways that was then impacting Long Island Sound. That was why they removed us off of being able to utilize sand. I would say that they're probably going to find that by using salt, they're going to see a salination problem of the rivers eventually down to Long Island Sound. They haven't gotten there yet, But I suspect that, give it a few more years of evaluation, they're going to find that the salt is creating a salination effect on our rivers.
You would think salt is much more environmentally unfriendly than something that came from the earth.
We can't
I mean,
make it
salt
up.
comes from the earth too,
You're-
but.
Yeah.
You're talking about the department
I
that
get
said
it,
it was
but it's,
okay to dump bleach on the road and let it go into the system.
Right. I know at times they stretch a little when it's,
They
like
will.
This year with the ice, they've added some.
Yeah,
Nice,
especially on significant hills, like,
Because
we do use still some sand because you need the grit.
Right, when
You-
it's,
you need
gets so
it.
cold, the salt
mean Lum
doesn't
Street?
work, and then.
Lum Street, that 90-degree angle.
Yeah. Yeah, and so there are some areas that we do utilize still a very small quantity of sand, but we do still utilize sand in those areas because, number one, if it is too cold, the salt won't work. Secondly, there are some areas that you have to have the sand in order to get any grip whatsoever in order to be able to get through that. There's some really shaded areas that the salt also doesn't work very well in, and you need the sand in order to be able to make it safe and passable. So, but it is very minimal in areas that we can use it. Largely, they've, pushed everybody over to the salt. And I've said this from the get-go, you think the sand is bad, wait until you spend years with just doing salt. Okay.
And the liquid they put down, you see the trees on the side of the highway get burnt from that spray.
It
that
does.
drifts onto them, and
Yep.
That liquid also eats the lining from the highways, the lines, so you can't even see anything.
Yeah,
So it's like
the
a
paint,
total,
the
the paint,
paint.
it's,
paint.
it's like a total waste of money to even put lines on the highway. Because they're gone.
Yeah. So, that is definitely a challenge. But, so that's the proposal around salt for this year. It's really trying to move more of the regular expected operational costs of a given year back into the operational budget. Any other question on storm maintenance? Seeing none, we'll go to recreation. Let's go have a party. No. Recreation is very hardworking, I'll tell you that.
It's just for the fun of it.
It is just for the fun of it. So recreation, some of this is in expectation that we will be getting over to Westfield Avenue late fall. I would say theater probably won't really start in there until after January. So we're trying to kind of balance. You're going to see when we get to the community center budget itself, you're going to see we're trying to balance two buildings at the same time. But within this budget, there is a proposal for a new permanent part-time position directly related to senior programming. And this is only for, half the year, but this is really to really focus on additional senior programming related to the expanded space within Westfield Avenue for that programming. And then a lot of what you're seeing with regards to advertising, contractual services, and even the operating supplies, those increases are all related to theater, right? Which has the offsetting revenue completely. So theater, the productions will be bigger. The cost for those productions, because the rights, when you purchase the rights for a show, it's based on the number of seats in the theater. Our theater will be substantially larger. Those production rights costs will be more. So there is that. But again, those are all offset by anticipated revenue gains from ticket sales, which will all show here. So actually, if you look at the top of that page, you're going to see we have the projected revenues right above that. So we're projected, instead of 145,000 in revenues, we're projecting 181,000 in revenue for revenue for programs. See that right at the top? Yep. So you can actually see, based on what our current budget is, the net impact, or the net, what the taxpayers are paying for within their mill rate this year is just under 358,000. We're actually projecting that to go down to 346,000. So we're looking at revenue offsetting more of that overall cost. Make sense? Yes, ma'am.
Question on, for the part-time person for senior programming, would that be like leading the way to where we take on our own senior?
Yeah, that would be the beginning stages of implementing a more,
Stepping away from QV senior? to-
well, providing I would say providing an alternative senior center programming for the townspeople than just the Quinnebog Valley Senior Center, right? It would be starting to house our own senior center. But that would be one of the first steps into doing that.
Now, Mary, is there potential, you know, the senior learning program that we heard about
Yes.
recently, would that potentially be something that we could pick up?
Yeah, so the Learning and Retirement Program, yeah, Learning and Retirement Program is actually working directly with our community center right now. They're expected that they will continue and grow. In Westfield Avenue, they'll be paying facility fees in order to be able to house their program within the community center. So, yes, that program, they're very excited to work with our community center, and they are bringing, you know, a lot of people to the community center for that program.
Yeah, this past Monday, they actually had 2 programs, and Vance, one of the board members for rec, had attended both of those, so it was like his 3rd time in the building,
Yeah,
because he attended the first 2 LIRs, and
yeah,
so.
it's really good.
I think for me, Mary, what would help with this, I remember last year, it's a little unclear. Can we get a breakdown from the theater with a projection?
A separate theater
Yeah,
cost?
just then it would make sense. You could see very clearly, this is how that's going to offset.
Okay.
Yeah.
So under the revenues too, now this includes all their, like, their exercise classes.
Yes,
their
it's all their
sports
program
camps.
fees.
Because I know they brought up too on the sports camps, within the first 2 hours, they had 13 kids sign up for the football sports camp this summer
Yes.
in the first 2 hours. And
Yep.
I guess it's already half full.
Yep.
So that's all revenue.
Yeah, to
Well, there
that
is-
point, I wouldn't mind seeing a whole breakdown, including the theater. I think it's an easier sell.
Yeah, I would have to, I clearly can't give that to you over lunch.
Oh, no.
But I'll
and,
work
you
with the
know,
department on,
I'm just saying
yeah.
that makes it a lot easier. See, it's right here.
Yep.
I know, Michelle, I know that all of their exercise programs are usually booked. They're filled to capacity every time they open up, and the sports camps have been taken off.
It sounds good to me. What I'm saying is,
I
so
know.
she said, theater, theater, theater. It'd be great to have that saying, say, look at theater. Look at the
Yeah, I
revenues.
understand.
They're
Yeah.
always
I get it.
sold out.
So, any other questions on recreation?
Well, mine's on the part-time position for the senior programming. A lot of the programs that are provided in Brooklyn, they're also provided already in Killingly. So their ask is already for a duplication of services that we're providing.
You mean for Brooklyn?
Yes.
Okay. I was trying to make sure I understood, yeah.
Yes.
So, and I have, when we get to that page, I have included, as an outside agency, I've included their full ask. That will be a deliberation that you as council members have with regards to that.
Now, can I ask about, remember the $10,000 position? Is that something totally different?
That is, so the municipal agent for the elderly is more of a coordination position that assists in helping our senior population, coordinate or understand where to go to better understand benefits like Social Security, Medicare, things like that. These senior programs would be related to more education or enrichment programs, like, creating or establishing some sort of like, senior coffee hour or, trips or something like that, more directly related to that population.
Yeah, they have the weekly movie already.
They do. They also do they do the stew and story. They
And the picnics. and-
Yes.
Yeah.
They do a lot of different things, and this is just trying to expand on those. It's every program that they've done has been really well received. Yeah. with a wait list even. I had a wait list on mine. It was amazing. It's like, what?
And it's not all Killingly residents.
Correct.
So that's outside money coming in.
Correct. Correct. They definitely, but I will say the bulk of that really is Killingly residents or Killingly residents bringing like their parent or, you know, one of their close friends, right? It's largely being able to make that connection within their own community. A lot of it is Killingly residents. Are we good with recreation? Okay, we'll go to Parks and Grounds. Parks and Grounds, the biggest shift here really is the full-time position. And I will say, so the proposal here is for half of this full-time position to be paid for out of the operating budget here, the other half to be paid out of the NIPS fund. So if you, and I'm gonna make you do some flipping, but if you look at page F4, it's the pink pages. F4 is the NIPS surcharge program. And I'll explain to you why I've only recommended that half of this be paid for out of the NIPS fund versus the whole amount at this moment. So NIPS fund, our revenue is about $50,000 a year. There is a residual balance that we have in there. So coming into the current year, we're expecting that we're going to have about $160,000 in that fund. We are already, and we have been for the past 2 years, using this fund to pay, to reduce the amount of CNR contribution by the operating budget for our sweepers. We've been using this fund to pay for that depreciation to eventually be able to pay for sweepers. However, there's room to be able to pay for half of that part-time position. I would argue that given the balance of the fund, that for the upcoming year, you collectively as a council could decide to fund the full position out of the NIPS fund for this year, for the upcoming year, and then knowingly make the decision that you will be then implementing it, moving it from the NIPS fund into the operating budget over the next couple of years to phase it in, largely because the annual revenue in that fund is not enough to sustain a full-time position in that fund every year. However, you can use up some of that back fund that you have to be able to phase this in. So my proposal before you is half of this position being funded in the operating budget and half being funded in the NIPS budget. That being said, collectively, you could decide to shift the whole thing into the NIPS budget for the upcoming year. But know that when you get to 2027, you're going to need to make another decision on that. And it's going to have to shift. And I will say for the full-time, the third full-time position, I'm not proposing to shift a seasonal position to a full-time position because we're going to be taking on Westfield Avenue property. That alone during the wintertime is going to be one person running around that parking lot plowing the entire time. Right now, as it stands during the winter months, when we have a plow event, our 2 parks guys are in and we have to assign one of our highway department staff to parking lots to just make sure that they can get through all the parking lots in enough time. That drains resources from your highway department. It means that they're not as efficient as they could be because they have to assign somebody from highway over to parks. Also
So,
means that.
Just so I understand, Mary, so school maintenance does none of the plowing?
School maintenance will no longer be doing the plowing of that facility because it's no longer going to be a school facility.
Okay.
So the school maintenance will no longer plow that parking lot. They also won't maintain any of the grounds. That all becomes us. Right. It also, by having the third parks position, and I'll use today as a good example. So you are seeing a reduction in the overtime. So one of the things I worked very closely with our park staff was what do we really need to do for overtime for response to our parks in the weekends through the winter. We still have a high utilization, but do we need to go every single day? What do we really need to do? So we came up with a different schedule because I will say our parks crew, having only 2 of them that are coming in all winter long, they're burning out because, it's every other weekend. They're pulling weekend shifts. A third person helps kind of spread that out a little bit more. But one of the other challenges that they're faced with right now, especially, parks usually on the weekend only comes in for like 2 hours, right? And the first thing, they blow through all the trashes, make sure that there's no, vandalism, no issues with anything, make sure the facilities are good, and they're out the door, right? That's not the case for right now. Right now, they're also having to make sure that the fields are lined, because our high school utilizes our baseball and softball fields at Owen Bell. We line those. The school doesn't. So we're paying more overtime for our crews because we have to line those fields and we have to have them ready for games. Because it's not just a recreation game that's happening. These are high school level events that are happening. There's a different level of requirements there. So instead of being here for 2 hours, our parks person is probably going to be here today for 4 to 4.5 hours, right? In order to be able to get those fields ready to go for whatever games that are occurring on the weekends, first thing Monday, that kind of stuff. So just know that, and they have to reline them during the week. It's not a just one and done and walk away. We only have to do it in the springtime, and we don't ever have to go back and reline the fields. That's a weekly occurrence, sometimes more frequently than weekly, in order to get those fields ready for the coaches to accept them as playable fields for their games.
That's an interesting comment you just said about the coaches accepting them as playable fields. It's difficult. Owen Bell is recreation of all types and whatnot.
Yep.
Now we have the school utilization. They want a higher level of,
We do not get recoupment from the Board of Education for those overtime costs. We acknowledge them
Right,
within
that's-
our in-kind services, but we don't get the general government side. This budget does not get recoupment for those expenses. Those are not paid for by the Board of Education budget.
but how much, we've got a lot of fields at the high school. Are they more utilization?
They
of-
don't use them for games.
That blows my mind.
They are not used for games.
Well, they're
They are
just-
used for practices, but they are not used for games.
I think that's a whole nother,
That's a whole nother ball of wax.
that
Okay,
that back section is so poorly,
Maintained.
yeah, the land itself isn't conducive. I think the cost to make it conducive to be used, we'd be looking at dollars that would be
There would-
in the millions of dollars. If you wanted to do turf baseball fields, I think
Right.
there is a balance there.
So-
Do I think it's a shortcoming when they built the building? Yes, but.
There was challenges when we were building that facility. There were challenges with those fields, right? And ultimately, the town ended up going into a settlement with the installer. That being said, so there's whether or not the grass has sufficient soil beneath it before hitting bedrock, as to whether or not there's sufficient root development to be able to establish thick enough natural grass turf to be able to sustain athletic. There is concern around that. There is questions around that. There also they don't have handicapped accessibility for that either. They don't have, those fields are not accessible in that way. They also don't have a lot of the other infrastructure, like they don't have a press box. They don't have, do they even have dugouts? I don't even know if they have dugouts
No,
out there. They don't.
nothing down
Right, so they don't have a lot of that additional infrastructure that you would find with a traditional high school game level play field. They were really installed more as practice level. So they've been using the Owen Bell fields for a long time for gameplay level fields. So, and I just bring that to you because I don't think a lot of people recognize that the costs for that and the costs for the maintenance of that and for the lining of that, the marking of the fields, I don't think that a lot of people really recognize that that is borne on the town side of the fence, right? Those costs are not borne on the Board of Education side of the fence. For those, it's really all on the town side. And again, we have, Little League has their field that's down there. There's a lot of, recreationally, people can play on those fields as well, so I get, it's not exclusively high school or exclusively Board of Education, but the driving force around a lot of the marking of the fields and preparation of the fields and all of that is driven by the level of play for the high school.
So it's like an unfunded mandate by the school.
Well, it's just the use of our fields, yeah.
To the standard.
It's the use of our fields.
We should,
Well, didn't the Board of Ed now, they got money they're using to try to make the access road handicap so we can get down to their fields, but that's a minor
Well,
step to try to.
They're looking at utilizing funding in order to be able to establish a road for emergency vehicle access to the lower fields.
Correct. Someone gets hurt, they need to.
Emergency
ambulance out.
vehicles.
So it's not to the
We've
next-
had fires back there that we have almost had damage to fire equipment because they don't have emergency vehicle, fire engine, fire truck access to those lower fields.
So that's all it is minimal access, so we're talking
It's
about-
emergency access. They have a cease and desist from the fire marshal with regards to large scale or activities on the lower backfields, as well as having to have a plan in place for the use of the football field for any large scale gatherings due to limited emergency vehicle access.
So they still haven't, so that is still.
A road has to be built.
So they haven't even like put that in yet, or is it?
No.
Is that this budget coming up?
Well over $1 million.
It's about 1.7 million.
They should have built a road. Yeah.
Well, Bill Silver was doing it didn't really care about the fields, he just wanted to build the building.
So,
How do we-
yeah.
could
So
you
it was
give an
about one-
example of in-kind services? you mentioned?
So, example of in-kind services, that would be, when they get loads of salt from, the town, we calculate that. If we respond to, we've done various capital projects, like we've, done some drainage work, or we've done, we haven't done it recently, but paving work. All of that, the town pays for that, and then we acknowledge that on a separate form to the state saying that, look, we did this work for the Board of Education. So it gets counted as, at the state level, gets counted as Board of Education work, but we don't get the town government budget side, the town operation side, doesn't get reimbursement from the Board of Education for that, right? Like we do with the SRO and the armed security, right?
Yeah.
We charge them and bill them specifically for those costs, and the Board of Education pays the town for those.
Well,
And so we see a revenue.
why I was wondering about the in-kind, so do we get services in return like that?
No,
No, we don't, because sometimes that's a back and forth. Is there any way to estimate if we weren't to keep it up to, like, do we have an estimate of what those in-kind specialized lines are costing us?
I can look back at the last EDO one.
As opposed to
Yeah.
not keeping it up to standards?
I can look out,
Yeah.
I can look back and see what we have in that prior reporting.
The access road, I know the town highway crew has plenty to do, but they've done other paving and stuff. Is
Yeah.
that something they can assist with? And
Yeah, that's a great
Reducing
question.
that
I
cost?
actually, we brought that to Matt. Matt said he would take a look at that. Based on the topography of where that road would have to go in, there's a large amount of fill. It would not make sense for our crews to do that. We think somebody hiring, a contractor would be able to dedicate the necessary crews and equipment. It would be very similar in cost for us to do it. So it really would make sense. Matt really did look at that to see if there was a way. And we've even, him and Alex spent a fair amount of time trying to even explore alternative pathways of bringing the road in that maybe wouldn't necessarily have the same cost factor. But ultimately, it comes down to it's a pretty significant topography change. A lot of fill would have to be brought in. We've talked to them about, perhaps they first work with a forester or harvester in order to be able to remove a lot of the tree and do some of that clearing, and maybe they could get that done as part of a forest management type event, which would then potentially trigger some revenue for the sale of timber. But I don't know what avenues have been explored for that.
Thank you.
But the same thing, like highway is
Sorry.
jumping in. I mean, we have, Parks and Recs have their maintenance people, but it seems like highway,
Oh, we voluntold highway all the time.
well, that's what I told Matt. I says, you're the end guy, and I understand. and
They're
I
the
says, "I'll
cleanup
put
crew.
it-"
They come in and take over everything and fix it all.
I say I throw it in your lap, but I hope it's timed right, that you have time to respond. It's not the last minute. I mean, how many times now we got a lot of issues. We got people, the master gardeners are at Cat Hollow. They got something. They want a response right away.
Yeah.
It's not bad maybe in the wintertime, but in the summertime, they got enough paving and other stuff that
Yeah.
they cannot stop and go to some of
Yeah.
these events. I mean, even the conservation, they've got them on the 1892
Yes.
whatever project is, and
We're going to be out at Chase Res.
okay.
The highway's going to be down at Chase Res for a little while coming up because they need to stabilize some of the entrance points with regards to that forest management. But yes, highway is definitely a very demanded department. A lot of people, there's some assumptions that people have around what highway may be doing. Well, it's not winter. They're not plowing. So they must be just sitting there waiting to do something, right? That's not the case. These guys are incredibly busy. And I will say Matt has been doing a really good job with trying to articulate to the other departments and to the other commissions that, we have a schedule. I mean, you really are working with a contractor, right? Like it's working with a construction contractor. We schedule everything out, and he's very purposeful around his scheduling. And sometimes he can flex out a little bit depending on weather, right? Like if they are going to get rained out on something and it makes more sense for them to do something else, he absolutely will grab a job really quickly that they can get done in a rain event to keep everybody going. But I have a lot of volunteers on that. He keeps telling me, do I still have to do them? I'm like, yes, you do, because I will come haunt you. I don't care. No, he's really responsive. And, because we've developed the process of we incorporate everyone in from the very beginning conversations around these things. So people can, he can say, hey, guys, I have X, Y, and Z also going. Like, timing-wise, let's talk about reality here. So we can set expectations appropriately. But, yeah. It's a lot.
But I mean, that's why it's across the board. Highway is across the board helping other departments, and we don't really see it. So we got to give them credit.
Yeah.
And they're not getting reimbursed for the time, and some of the things, like even, it's up to the coaches at the high, we don't like this. I'm kind of looking at, we have recreational fields for recreation, but if we got to bring it to a higher standard, it's just like the application of pesticides and whatnot when we're going at the football field to get whatnot. Well, that's a different level than the playing fields on our rec fields.
Mm-hmm.
So it puts a lot of
Football's
burden
turf.
on the highway department at very little notice. And like I try to tell them, you're the dumping ground. Yes, I agree, but I hope that you get proper notice. And then if it comes up, it's on overtime, that's even worse. I mean, it's one thing if it's regular time and he can work it in, but I do not like it, but I'd rather not have it on overtime. How can the other entities look upon his schedule? Nobody else wants to spend overtime, but it's all right to spend highway department overtime to support some of these activities, so. it'd be nice if there was, if you start reimbursing highway for the efforts they have to put in, and all of a sudden you put this secondary, oh, here's the overtime fee, then it really shows up, so, but that doesn't happen. So how does he get extra credit for what they're
Wait till,
really doing?
wait till we get to PD. And we'll talk about overtime with PD, but go ahead.
All right, so with a third Park and Rec person, how is that going to reduce weekend overtime because they're Monday through Friday employees contractual, or is there a potential in their contract to change them to 7-day-a-week employees because the parks and the rec department do need people there on Saturday and Sunday? Like healthcare workers don't get overtime for Saturday and Sundays.
No, there's not an opportunity to change that within their union contract. Number two, it will, so that's why we redeveloped, what do they actually need to do for overtime over the, what I would consider the slower months, the off-peak months, to be able to reduce the amount of overtime. But a third person is not going to reduce overtime. It's not.
So, just so I understand, the union contract doesn't allow for staggered shift?
Correct.
Okay.
But can that be changed in the future?
We have just ratified a new 3-year contract that is coming to the town council for April. That is not a revision in it.
So a couple questions. I just want to make sure, if you could explain it like I'm 5 years old. So they were, last year, if we go to full-time labor, 129, their ask was 194, so 65,000 for a full-time position.
Yeah, so that's the full position.
That's the full. You're proposing out of operating that we have a change of 27,000, and then also use 38,000 from the NIPS
Yeah.
to encompass the 65,000.
Yes.
To offset it. So that would be, on the operating side, it's $27,371.
Right, plus
Which is-
some fringe benefit that
Yeah.
has to happen, but yes.
Because I look at it by mill, it's about 100th of a mill.
Yes.
That's about what that is. So that's how I do math. It's like 100th of a mill. It costs money. My second on the overtime, it'd be nice to see, so when you talk about those fields, just because the public, we want to be able to explain to them what they're paying for or not paying for.
Sure.
So baseball and softball is going to start right around the first or second week of April, but it's done at the end of May.
Yep.
So those are done. The rest of the whole year, those are being lined, those two fields, baseball. Are they responsible for like American Legion in the summer? Are we paying our highway department for stuff like
Yep.
that?
Yes,
Okay, so that's different. And then
Yep.
Little League goes through the summer.
yep.
So,
And then we also have the soccer field as well that gets lined.
okay,
Which I will say, high school doesn't play on the soccer field, but we have a lot of community organizations that are playing on the soccer field.
so the
The rental for that goes into the outdoor trust, it doesn't go into here. But yes, there's a small.
So I see that the overtime you're showing a $6,000 reduction. So that's
Yes.
that's a big positive. So even though we're looking at adding a person, we're looking at lowering the overtime. But I look at that position with taking on Westfield. Without it, where are we going to be without that full-time position in rec? Are they going to be able to maintain all the? It's one of the
They
best
would
parts of
have-
our town is these parks to me
They would have to pull more resources from the highway department,
from the highway.
which would then constrain the highway department into what projects and what they can further do, right, for the town. So you end up draining resources out of the highway department in order to be able to just keep your head above,
Okay.
barely keep your head above water.
I just like
right?
that as an explanation of why are we not spending the money
Right.
to do it. All right,
Yeah.
that's good.
There's also a field up in East Killing by the,
Yes.
that they maintain, right?
Yes, we maintain the one up by the QV, yep.
So then when Bucky was here the other day, we were talking about moving down to the Davis property. He
Yep.
was throwing out alluring to the fact that what's gonna get some of the baseball fields out of Owen Bell to
One.
take some of the use off and bring it down there.
That's the one Little League field.
Just Little League.
It's just the Little League field, not baseball. Just Little League.
Okay.
That would become a Little League complex.
Okay.
But that's only Little
I thought
League.
it was a higher end.
No.
Oh, okay, prior to his making that statement, that's what I thought, and then
Yeah.
I'm thinking, oh, we're gonna have more fields and something, maybe the high school usage of Owen Bell, that was gonna go down.
No.
to Davis, okay,
No,
all right.
not the intent. No,
Okay.
he was speaking of just moving that one Little League field.
So they have all the, were they gonna utilize the football fields there for practice and stuff, or soccer, at, Westfield Ave? Or could that be all the fields at this, by the, sewer treatment plant moved to there instead of Davis?
So those fields are already fully utilized by community organizations as well as I think the girls lacrosse is still using the Westfield Avenue facility. So those fields are used a lot already. There's no way to move Little League over there.
I think you have Nikon Soccer still
We
using
do.
it.
Nikon Soccer uses it. Midget Football uses it.
Yep.
They use the fields outside of the football field for practice. Yeah, go by there on a practice night and
I know I've seen activity there, I just,
mobbed.
that was just
Yeah.
I said, I wonder if that could happen, or it had been looked at.
yeah, we have, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I know, right? We were looking over the roof.
To your point, you probably could reorganize that whole area and make, a little, but I don't know what the cost effect would be to rework that whole area. It'd be
Yeah,
a
but
lot.
you wouldn't be able to get a Little League field over there, not with the football utilization or with the soccer utilization.
Yeah.
You wouldn't be able to make a Little League complex over there. You might be able to get one additional Little League.
You share the open space. Okay, they're running through center field.
Exactly, right?
You laugh, but there's areas that they do have baseball fields where
Yes.
they hit each other, and the outfielders are back to back.
Softball field over there? Do they
Yes.
still have right behind the school?
Yeah.
The backstop is there. I always just wondered how they utilize the old baseball field over in the corner, and what is that? That did seem like some wasted area, but they could be using it for multiple things
They
for
are.
practice.
They are. There's a lot of practices that are
So
occurring
they're
over there.
all being used,
And
like
the,
old field hockey field. They
Yes,
use
that's
that
the
for
baseball
practice.
field. Yep.
and the school utilizes it for some of their, like field day activities and stuff like that. It gets used for that too.
So our rec fields get a lot of use.
A lot of use.
Other entities are filling in and supporting rec. Yeah, it's even more than I thought with the highway is filling in, and then people complain, oh, the roads are this and that. Well, you want nice rec fields, we have to put into something. We have to increase the rec people, we have to put a little pressure on Board of Ed. But everybody likes our fields, everybody likes our facilities, so we gotta promote that too, so it's,
I think when the town takes over Westfield Avenue, you might see an improvement in the fields over there as far as whatnot, their upkeep
I
and
think so,
maintenance,
yeah.
yeah.
I agree.
But that's gonna require that's a lot to do. That's a huge
It's work.
spot. That's a lot of fields.
It's a lot of
And
grass.
all the grounds, yeah.
Mary, is there a way to get us the cost of when somebody uses a field, an outside organization?
I'll get the rental schedule.
Thank you.
Now, Mary, you had mentioned the possibility of fully funding that position for 1 year out of the NIPS fund. How
Yep.
much of a change would that be above the 38? Would it double it to,
It would be, in the town operating budget, it's 38,000.
Okay.
In the town operating budget. So
Okay.
you would take out this 27,000 and then the remaining is in our fringe benefit side.
okay, all right, so
It
it
would be 38. It's
an additional 38 on top of the 38.
yes.
Okay. Yep.
altogether.
Huh?
That's before benefits.
No, that's including benefits.
So it's a 76 position
Yeah.
with benefits.
With benefits, yeah.
Okay, 65.
So basically,
benefits are 11.
if we were to do that, we would only be able to do that for 1 year.
Correct.
Without going and ending up fully depleting the NIPS. Because at that point, it would bring the balance down to 28,000
Yep.
after 1 year. I was just doing some numbers
Yeah.
just to kind of throw that out there. So
That's
people
why I
wouldn't-
said, you could do it probably for this 1 year, but again, with the cognizant and knowing that if you do it, you're gonna need to start shifting in the 27 year.
Yep.
Yep.
And the other thing to consider too is even by doing half of it in the NIPS, we're only gonna be able to do that for 2.5 years before it's gonna have to get shifted. If we continue on with the money going in as CNR for the street sweeper out of the NIPS fund, and the revenue stays stable.
And so I believe that the revenue will start to come up because they did increase it from 5 cents to 10 cents. However, you see that as a delay coming into this revenue, right? Because anything that was 5 cent, right? Like it's taking a while to get that 10-cent revenue in. So it is a bit of a shift. I think that revenue is going to come up, but not enough to be able to sustain both, right? So you're going to have to make decisions in the upcoming years, but
Can we get more NIPS yard signs made?
you know how much nips we sell in the town of Killingly right now?
I looked at, remember we talked
That's the,
Norwich is
Oh, yeah,
second or third in the whole state.
Yes.
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 Yes,
In
oh,
the
yeah,
whole state, Norwich is
Yeah.
ridiculous.
Yes.
Yep.
Every voting sign, you can put our favorite.
Right.
I think,
For like our population, that's a lot.
right.
Well,
Alcohol.
we have three, I always say we have three things. We have more pizza places, auto parts stores, and package stores per capita than in most places you go.
Yeah.
A lot of Dunkin'
There's
a lot of
a,
Dunkin' Donuts too.
No, you
there's
gotta
state
see-
regulations on how many package stores you can have.
There is,
And-
yes,
and
there is.
roadside churches.
Yeah.
but it's an interesting conversation I have with people about the income we get from that NIPS.
Yeah.
They can't understand it. It's like,
Wow.
you know, I'll bust somebody's chops a little bit, and then you start throwing, what? It's that much?
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
Yes.
Yep.
And you don't get that deposit back.
Right.
It
No,
was a joke when it was
No.
proposed, but damn, I'm like, wow, that's a lot of alcohol.
Yeah, but it still doesn't pick the nips up in front of my house.
No,
Oh.
no,
I
no,
was
no, no,
walking
no,
out
it's
from
terrible.
the mailbox the other day, and there was 10
Oh, yeah.
in a little section.
try living on Lake Road coming out of the industrial park.
Well, yeah.
Oh,
so
yeah.
It is,
Oh, yeah.
so there may be a change to
Yeah.
that down the road, so I don't know how long the NIPS fund is. Oh, yeah.
Well, the NIPS fund, the challenge with the NIPS is that the size bottle that they are, the small little bottle, there is no mechanism, there's no devices that can process them, right? That's why you can't get your deposit back, because there's the machines cannot accept something that small. And so that's where they pushed it into this. So you need to create a machine.
Yeah.
You need to create a machine that,
A 3D printer.
yeah, well, go talk to
got-
Jill.
we got
Go
the
talk to Jill.
redemption.
I'm pretty sure she's got something.
We got the
Right.
Redemption Center over here, let's get them going,
Get them to
unique.
create one.
So this was their mechanism, and it was, the towns can then hire people to go out and pick up all the nips. And I'm like, well,
No, not.
right? So that's pretty much what this is. There is some shifting within this department with regards to, can you get it? With regards to just recognizing between operational and landscaping supplies. And the additional cost in contractual services support is also with regards to porta potties. They're more expensive. So
Hey,
that's the other component there.
so wastewater. Wastewater is expensive.
It is. Managing those are more expensive,
Yeah,
So-
nobody wants those, they're awful,
right?
that's the truth.
Because there's too much junk in them.
We opened it up one time, well, let's accept this guy, we did a in-kind service, fixed the field, it was, our thing ended up full of shingles.
Yes, no, you
Roof
just,
shingles.
you'd be amazed at what's inside of those things. Don't even do it.
They were having, the ones that were in Davis Park, they were finding, needles in the bath.
Yeah, for sure. That's easy, yeah. That happens
The
all the time.
composting ones like that they have I've been to at Mansfield Hollow and some of the other parks are actually very nice.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, the solar powered ones at Nash Bucket, they're like run by, the composting toilet.
So any other questions on parks and grounds?
Well, the other thing, like, I keep getting some comments about Cat Hollow and parking. So, again, it's, Owen Bell is the primary rec field. Cat Hollow is right there. That's the second place a lot
Yep.
of people.
And
are
there's
going
not
there.
really anywhere to expand parking
So I don't know
there.
how we can
It really
do
isn't.
something with that, just to throw it out there that that's a.
We don't own because we used to walk through there when I was a boy, through the trail of woods across from Colts Plastic.
Yes.
But we don't own that.
No, we don't.
That's the only spot I could ever see putting parking, because you could park 20 cars there.
Yeah, well, we don't own that.
I don't know that there's anywhere else
Yeah.
there.
So,
Because that came up with the Conservation Commission, they're looking for volunteers to help out doing whatnot. And there's not even enough parking for the volunteers to do the gardening functions that they're trying to do. And then if you bring in the public at the same time, so just. to-
everybody's got a carpool. You got a
Just to throw it
carpool.
out there a little bit that.
We need a bus
Parking
service.
is an issue.
Walk, it's good exercise.
Yeah, we need a bus service.
How about,
But we need a place to park still. Where the off-site parking gonna be? And then-
Westfield Ave.
Does anyone ever looked at the opposite side, off the,
Yeah.
that opposite side of moving the fence back and trying to create?
Yeah,
A
I mean,
few
there's a little bit, but I mean, you're not gonna get anything substantial.
No.
You know, I mean, there's nothing that you're gonna all of a sudden, magically wand 20, 30 spaces out of. You might be able to get eke a couple out, and they're looking at ways they might be able to eke a couple more spaces out, but not for what, the level of parking. No, there's never enough parking. Everybody, never enough parking. We'll put up a parking garage.
Well, people say that here downtown, and it's funny, if you go into a city and you want to eat at a restaurant, it's nice, you'll walk 2 blocks. Here, if they have to park in the back and walk 75 feet, it's like they're walking from here to Putnam.
Right?
I'm like, you're not walking from here to Putnam.
It's true.
There's a lot of parking down here. I don't know how people
There
say
is.
there's not a lot of parking. There's a lot of parking.
There is.
There is
Yes.
a
Obviously, they
lot.
haven't tried to get parking in Putnam.
Right. It's an odd, it's an odd thought process
Yep.
here.
Yep. Any other questions? Yeah. Any other questions on Parks and Grounds? If not, we'll move over to Public Library. Public Library, the only increase here with regular part-time is minimum wage impact. And that's just, again, we take an estimation based on what we're gonna, think it might be, but this is adjusting for what actually took place on January 1, and again, that minimum wage impact will hit again next January 1. So we're not sure.
When does the increase, when does it end?
Yes, yes,
When does it end?
It
When are
doesn't.
they at their cap?
it doesn't.
It just keeps going up
Yes.
every year by what?
Inflation.
Oh, my God.
Yes, there's no cap right now. Which is going to continue to add pressure on, I mean, we already have employees that are literally like, 75 cents off of. You're going to have more
Yeah.
they're going to capture into minimum wage, which then also puts, pressure on, well, now I'm,
Everybody else is-
well, not only that, there's a mentality around being a minimum wage worker, right? I'm more skilled than a minimum wage employee, right? So then why am I only getting paid minimum wage? Even though minimum wage could end up being over $20 an hour, it's still a mindset that is really challenging, and it makes other positions harder to fill because now it's just a minimum wage job, right? So that is just that's a perception
Call it.
challenge, but you're going to run into that more and more. And a lot of our library staff are kind of right there at that cusp of getting drug into having a bigger swing on minimum wage simply because you're going to sweep more of them into being minimum wage employees.
Well, they also look at, they got 2 increases and,
Right,
we're
so
only
we
getting
made it
1.
So it's definitely a challenging conversation, but that's really the only adjustment with regards to library. Any questions on library? Seeing none, we'll go to civic and cultural events subsidies. The only adjustment on this one really is about the proposal, and Bucky had alluded to this when or kind of mentioned this when when the recreation met with you guys, that this upcoming budget year is going to be the budget year in which we have our Independence Day celebration that will commemorate the 250th anniversary of our independence. And so his proposal right now, that Red, White, and Blue is funded entirely by sponsorships, right? We are incredibly fortunate that we as a community put on a celebration like that funded by sponsorships, right? So it covers the fireworks. So this would add more to the fireworks and provide more performance type programming for that event. But it would just be that one, the same red, white, and blue that we're having, but just bigger for that event. So that's the proposal that's before you for that, but that's the only change to this one.
Now Memorial Day, the increase is that, the help with
Cost,
flowers?
cost of
or-
flags, no
Oh,
flags. It's flags. It's cost of flags. And of course, we are still using Cemetery Trust Fund for managing care of graves. So we do have actually, he is one of our highway employees, but it doesn't have to be them. Him and his wife, I've appointed them as stewards of a group of our town-owned cemeteries where he'll be managing them as far as maintenance, ongoing maintenance of them, caring for any of those graves. So any of the costs associated with that are being charged to our cemetery trust. We have sufficient funds in there to be able to do that and continue to do that for right now. So that's where those care of graves goes.
Mary, is Hutchins Street on that list for a cleanup?
Hutchins. I don't remember off the top of my head. There's 70-something cemeteries in the state, in our town. Hutchins,
Over by
I-
KMS.
yeah, I think so.
Okay,
Yeah, I think so.
okay.
I don't think that one's with an association. But I will have to double
Yeah,
check.
the borough, I think, was looking at something because of the two. There's one in Franklin and
Yep.
then Hutchins. Don't get me going.
Do they not get maintained? Do they not get cleaned, those two?
Well, they are now, but Hutchins Street's in rough shape.
It is.
Yeah.
And it
well,
was
so
the
is the
end
Ninth
of the
Street.
spooky cemetery tour and that kind of,
Yeah.
I don't know, took that,
Up one side down.
yeah, I didn't like that. I don't think we use it for a prop for Halloween, so,
Mhm.
yeah, that kind of rubbed me the wrong way.
Okay. So that's civic and cultural. Any questions on that? Seeing none, we'll go over to community center. Let's see, what time are we at? 11 o'clock, okay. Community center, this is really largely the adjustment that we're making to take on Westfield Avenue for the percentage that is town. So based on the MOU, the costs are divided by square footage utilization. And so this is based on the costs that the school has been paying for utilities and contractual services and allocating that based on the square footage utilization that we've gotten from the architects. So that's what this is. I will say, I've had conversations with the superintendent on this. They budgeted the full cost of everything into their budget. So there's likely a duplication here of this 89,000 being in our budget and in the school's budget. So that the superintendent could probably remove that from her budget, recognizing that that's gonna come over as the town's
Let them keep it,
cost.
we'll, let them keep that in their budget.
Take out as much as we can.
Just saying that we've identified as a potential duplication between the two, and I would say that since the Westfield Avenue building is going to become town operated, the cost of it would be borne, that portion of the cost would be borne in the town budget, so.
There's quite an increase in the electricity and water charges for taking
So I
on.
noticed the electricity's, yeah.
Yeah.
And sewer.
Now, I have one question.
Yeah.
With EastCon being in there currently, does that count towards?
Board of Education.
Okay.
That's
I wasn't
all
sure if that
considered
counted.
Board of Education space, and
Okay.
even all of that space, even though the lower the lower spaces on the first floor that currently are being utilized by EastCon. She's not anticipating utilizing those for the Therapeutic Academy in the upcoming year. That's all still considered Board of Education space based on that MOU.
MOU, okay. All right.
So that maybe down the line gets revised or relooked at, but based on that MOU, those are all dedicated as Board of Education space because they are a tenant of the Board of Ed.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
So on the electricity, and you're saying it's based on the square footage that we're taking over, is there a separate meter?
No, there is not.
I mean, that might be an idea.
We do not have separate, we won't, because
The wiring.
We wouldn't be
nightmare
able to do
you
that.
create,
You can't do
it-
We wouldn't be able to do
you
that
would have
within
to
that
split
building.
the electricity in a building.
Yeah, you
And
you
the
do a
cost
split
of
thing.
doing that,
we just do it based on the square footage.
yeah,
Yeah. That would be rewiring the building.
yeah.
We're not rewiring the building.
So that difference reflects, it was showing 19,000, now 82. Is that because EastCon was, is the jump because we're taking on all of the?
So no, so the 19,000 is what we're spending at Broad Street.
Oh, got it. got
So
it.
we're managing
I
two
got it.
buildings
I got
in
it.
this.
I
This
got
is
it.
Broad
I
Street
got it.
and Westfield.
Now I get
So
it.
this is taking Broad Street, because I'm assuming, even though you're gonna probably move by January largely over there, you're still gonna have stuff happening at Broad Street. Like, Broad Street's not gonna shut the lights off, walk away, mothball it and everything like, there's gonna be a transition here, right? So we're incorporating a full year of community center, Broad Street facility in this budget. And we're incorporating about 3/4 of a year of Westfield Avenue utilization in this budget, right? So eventually, depending on what you guys decide to do with the community center on Broad Street, right? You would reduce that budget, right? Again, it's the community conversation around that, right? You would reduce that budget if you're no longer gonna have to maintain and manage that facility, right? But that's what you would, that's ultimately what you do.
So it should be better in the 26, 27 budget cycle.
Should be, yes.
So Mary, what you said about the therapeutic stuff, like what's their timeline on that? They're not gonna start that this next year?
Yeah, they are gonna be starting it this next year. They're planning on starting it in September, but they're only planning on using the second floor,
Right,
which is not all the same space that EastCon is currently using. EastCon currently utilizes several rooms on the first floor because they have younger grades.
Now, are they staying on the first
No.
floor, or they're gonna be moving?
EastCon is gonna be completely gone out of the building.
Okay.
So
they-
the Therapeutic Academy, they are only taking older grade children, so they can all be housed on the second floor,
Okay.
right? So while the Board of Education is not intending on using those classrooms that are currently used by EastCon on the first floor, we are still designating that all as Board of Education space. They may not be using it this year, I don't know, as they go
They
along.
may use it down
If
the
they
road.
just,
Okay.
if they decide to expand, then they would
Right, they'll
potentially
have that.
utilize those. So the calculation that we've used for addressing the square footage is based on the original MOU and all the same spaces. And any of the space EastCon was using was all deemed Board of
So
Education
it's gonna
space.
stay that way.
And because they were a tenant, and it all stays that way.
Okay.
Yep.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Okay. Going on. I think lunch is gonna be here around 11:30-ish or so. Other town buildings, this is really just the Bugby Building where the Historical Society is, and it's based on utilization and cost. So electricity's gone up some, and natural gas, is going up. Because we got a notification, natural gas was increasing, a pretty hefty amount. So we have a 25% increase expected in natural gas. Good with that one, but, building safety and inspections, this is our building and fire marshals. Largely, the big difference in that is in the CNR, and that was really with regards to vehicle replacements. These are 2 trucks, that are, yeah. Actually, this is the fire marshal trucks and the building, Yeah, the assistant building official. So we've had 3 vehicles that have had to be replaced within this fleet, and again, significantly stronger costs on those, especially the trucks.
I don't know, Jason, can you weigh into the cost of the trucks? Because, like at election time, I saw like these, I don't know, one of them, I don't know if it was, where it was from, was it the WPCA? But, you know, pretty red truck that looks like it has all the bells and whistles. Is there any way to reduce the cost of these trucks, and do they really need such big trucks?
We don't have a red truck.
I think it was a WPCA.
The WPCA doesn't have a red truck.
Somebody,
That would be a personal vehicle because we don't have a red truck.
maybe the Board of Ed, somebody had, it had.
So I will say, as far as the trucks that we have, we buy them off of the state bid. They have to be able to plow. So we're not going to buy, you can't buy a lower tonnage vehicle and still be able to plow. All of our trucks are required to still be able to plow. Which that really drives the size vehicle that you're purchasing, correct, Jason?
It does.
Yeah.
Aren't you talking about the interior add-ons that we did get complaints on that?
Oh, we don't have,
Yeah.
I don't know what vehicle you were looking at. We don't have a
There-
lot of interior add-ons to our trucks at all.
No.
We don't.
More than? Like, look at all of the
Yeah, they really don't. I mean, we do have, we do have a,
It's a legitimate.
yeah, I understand
question,
that.
yeah, yeah.
I'm saying, take a look at them.
We do have a hub where they can, a docking station for their laptops, because they do a lot of, they're out in the field doing inspections, and that allows them to be able to bring up information out in the field. So they do have that capability, but we don't get add-ons in our vehicles at all. If anything, our guys look at ways of removing things off the specs in order to be able to not, and sometimes it's more costly to remove it off the spec than to just buy it on the spec, because then it sometimes can jeopardize whether or not it stays on state bid. So the fire marshal trucks were bought as the state fire marshal trucks were bid.
In the state bid, they were saying you can, I forget what Matt was saying one time, the load truck, because there are not too many of them, they get the higher quality truck, the bigger GVW truck, because of the state bid is actually less
Less
than the
money.
smaller
Yeah.
vehicle that if
Yes.
you were buying
It-
both,
it's
you wouldn't have
weird
that
how that
opportunity,
works.
but they're buying so many across the state or
Because they
whatever.
can get a better
Yeah.
price. 'cause
So,
of
yeah,
how
they're
they-
getting a better price, and so you get maybe some of
And-
the, it's hard to say, yeah, we got a lot of bells and whistles. I look at, well, you got a lot of stuff in there, and it's like, oh, but the state bid.
Well, that's good to
terribly.
be able to look at them instead of having somebody ask you, well, why do they have these big, huge trucks, and why are we paying for that?
Yeah. So, and also know that with regards to fire marshals, we really are required to have them in trucks. They have turnout gear, and that turnout gear needs to not be in the same housed interior as them because of the off-gassing of carcinogens. So that has to be in the bed of a truck. It needs to be separated from them and not housed within the same, compartment as them. That wasn't the case. We did not have a second pickup truck for our deputy fire marshals. And so our deputy fire marshals had their turnout gear in an SUV with them. We have finally gotten them to a pickup truck, which they really should have had a while ago, but we didn't have the means in which to do that. We've gotten them there now because we were able to kind of move some of that fleet around to be able to give them that availability. So that's really critical and important for the fire marshal and the deputy fire marshals to have trucks.
Aren't there state regulations around that too?
There is,
Yeah.
which is why we have the requirement that they needs to
Now-
not be with them.
Now, I know the fire departments have to wash their gear. Is that something the town has to supply them with the ability to clean their gear?
Our guys have been utilizing some of our fire departments, and our fire departments have been very gracious. There's an in-kind. There's an in-kind. So, there's, that is largely, building and safety. Any questions on that? Seeing no more questions, we'll move over to animal control. This one's pretty easy. We contract out for animal control. This is the amount that we were given for an increase. I will say, at a 3.4% increase, it's a pretty mild increase, given that they've had a number of challenges and that they have finally what I would consider stabilized their workforce with regards to the animal control. They were really having a hard time with a lot of changeover in animal control. And I know Jim has really been working diligently on trying to stabilize that, but also make a lot of improvements, I don't know if that's the right word, to just their regular maintenance schedules for all of their facilities. So I think he's really been diving into animal control a lot. That's the increase related to that.
In respect to that, I'm getting some comments about animal control, but they're not here. If you don't like what's going on, you have to be here
Yeah,
and I'm only gonna take so much on, I can't,
yeah.
and,
And I will say for animal control right now, I know that, they've been incredibly taxed because of a very large case in Woodstock. They had to seize 100 animals out of Woodstock, and they also have a large seizure out of Sterling. And those animals, they have to hold. It's not like they can just automatically start adopting them out. And so the Woodstock case, well, they initially won the case, it's in appeals right now, and so they have to wait until they get through that process before they can start providing adoption options, before those animals become eligible for adoption. And so that has put a lot of strain on their facilities, because they have them now in multiple facilities. But it is a big strain.
but they cover so many towns, though, that's the other part that,
Yep,
again,
yep.
I don't know if we're getting a bang for our buck, but, that's out of my pay grade. I would just other than making this comment.
Yeah.
That's my,
I get it.
Are they doing personnel training with their animal control?
They are.
Good.
Yep,
Okay.
they are, and I
That's
know,
the complaint I get. Well,
Yep.
I think I told you what happened with,
yeah.
in Pomfret.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was ridiculous.
Yeah, no, he's been really,
She had to FOIA to find out whose dog it actually was.
yeah.
That's not acceptable.
Jim has been doing a lot of more in-depth work and, with the employees, as well as just kind of what the processes are and trying to really walk through all of that. So yes.
but then our issue that we had with the seizure a few years, are we out of that now?
We are. We don't have horses right now we're taking care of. It took a year. That process took a year. From the time it was seized until the time that those animals were released for adoption. And I will say, NECOG was really good in the fact that they didn't wait until, they were completely eligible for adoption to start figuring out how they could find homes for these animals. They didn't want to have to retain them for any longer than necessary. And so pretty much once they became eligible for adoption, they were adopted out really, really quickly. So we didn't have any incur any additional ongoing, but that took a year, and that was expensive. So I feel for Woodstock and Sterling. 'Cause big cases like that are expensive. Okay, if we're good for animal control, we'll go to law enforcement. All right, law enforcement. Some changes here, so part of the overtime increase here is due to athletic games. So I will say that we are starting to revisit this with the Board of Education. So the athletic director had been making some requests about having law enforcement, and we seem to be now going to so many games. Like, we only used to go to football games, right? We only used to cover the football games, and now we're covering football games and basketball games and soccer games and wrestling events. And I think that's all of them right now. Not yet, baseball, but give it time. We'll be there. So I think we need to go back and reset expectations on this. But right now we have, our overtime has been pretty hefty with regards to athletic events. And again, this is something that the Board of Education doesn't reimburse us on. It is borne solely on the town side. So I did, let them know that we were going to start needing to relook at, because even the $5,000 increase does not cover all of their events. So I said, we really need to relook at, and perhaps maybe it was, you only wanted them for a couple of games because you were having challenges with parents or, rivalries or whatever that is, and you didn't want to continue it, but they just keep sending their game schedules down, which gives the anticipation that you're still continuing to ask for coverage, right? We do try and fill that with ASOs when possible, right? Because, our guys also need to be on the roads, and our guys have a really heavy workload on the roads. So that's been a challenge, but usually when they're covering an athletic event, it's on overtime. We're not pulling somebody off the road to be at an athletic event. So that's really what that is. The armed security officers is we now have the full 5 officers. Again, that's 100% reimbursed by the Board of Education. And then you see some reductions with regards to the contractual services. The resident state trooper amount, that is based on, they gave us the new updated budget for next year. That's what we budget for, and some overtime, but we were really able to come down on, what you're really seeing there is the savings on not having to buy overtime from the troop, right? So it's really, we're budgeting for overtime of our resident state trooper, and maybe just a little bit more of overtime that we're going to see for like our special event. But largely, we're not having to really lean on the troop for that troop overtime any longer.
We're down to just one resident trooper now?
One resident state trooper. I will say that with the one resident state trooper, I've had state troop administration lean very heavily that the town should be getting a resident state trooper sergeant. That we shouldn't just have a resident state trooper, that we should have a resident state trooper sergeant, especially since we now have 8 guys. It's about, workload. If we were to go the route of a resident state trooper sergeant, it is more expensive, but also you're essentially eliminating somebody from the road. Right now, our resident state trooper pulls calls, right? Gibson does as many calls as all of our other guys, right? You're eliminating that because they go into an administrative role. Right. And so I've been reluctant, and I've pushed back and said, yeah, no, not right now, maybe later. Because there's nothing in our contract that requires any certain ratio for us to move to that. So I suspect as you continue along that may be a conversation that the state makes more loudly. This budget that is before you, in the operating budget here, is 9 full-time constables. I will say we still have a vacant 9th position, and that is for 2 reasons. Number one, we are now struggling with with our offering package for attracting new lateral transfers, and that's really in 2 different ways. One is because our current pension that we have, the defined benefit, it's not really that it's defined, defined contribution. It's not that it's a defined contribution, a 457 plan. It's that the employer portion, and this got changed when Sean was here, the employer portion has a 5-year vesting schedule to it. So it's not immediate, which is different than most other PDs. Secondly, our contribution is capped at 6%, which is significantly lower than many other PDs. Most other ones that have defined contributions are upwards of 10%. So that does make it more challenging when we're trying to attract a lateral, when they're looking at, and I will tell you, For PD, hands down, it is pension and it is wages. Those two things are what will attract. You can offer whatever other sundry things you want. Pension and wages is what you're at. The other thing is our onboarding wage rate for a lateral, especially a lateral of 20 or 15 or 20 years, is lower. They are expecting they're looking at somewhere in the 90s. We're at the beginning of 80. That's a challenge. So I think that, while I've budgeted for the full 9 in this budget, it could be reasonable for the council to decide to take a pause on that 9th one as you redevelop what your offering may be, right? As you redevelop what is your pension contribution for your existing employees for retention, as well as attracting new laterals in. That being said, when we look at the constabulary reserve, the page that I gave you with the reserves, you're going to see an expenditure out of there. I am proposing, we are in the process of onboarding, and I will be onboarding this person in the next couple of weeks as a entry-level officer. This person is going to go to the academy. This is a prime utilization of your constabulary reserve. Because my hope and desire, his hope and desire is going to be that he makes it through the academy and he is your 9th officer in, right? But it is about, a good 9 months before we get there, right? So academy won't start until the summer. We're looking at onboarding him sooner so that way we can start the process of administrative training in advance, right? It will give this individual a really good, solid opportunity to really start to see active police work before entering the academy. I think that will really give that individual a much more solid foundation going into the academy. We're also looking at participating in the LEC's academy. The LEC academy, we have, in comparison to post academy, we have gotten significantly better reviews from the LEC Academy. The individuals coming out of there are just more robust in their foundations, which is where we want them to be. So we are looking at the LEC Academy. But I have that entire position proposed to be expended out of the constabulary reserve. That would be something that, if everything pans out great, you would look to incorporate that position into this budget in your 27 year, right? Fiscal year 27 is when that position would come on in full here. But it's possible that you potentially look at this year and say, you know what, we're not going to fund that 9th position for this upcoming year as we reevaluate those foundational components of our structure for our law enforcement. Make what those revisions look like. I will say, for retirements, our guys take pride in, I think, knowing when everybody's retiring across the state. I swear. There's got to be a pool somewhere. There's got to be a something somewhere. But there's no real significant waves of retirees that are coming through that would potentially look to ours right now. So is there always a risk that if you don't fund this position, we're going to potentially have the opportunity of hiring a really great candidate and not have the funding to do so? Yes, that is a possibility. But I just think, we've really struggled with trying. I did actually, just a little while ago, we had a 9th candidate. We were actually in the process of going through the onboarding process, and the person withdrew. And they withdrew because of our pension, because of the vesting, and because of the percentage. So I just think that there's a foundational component there that probably needs to be worked through before you're really going to be able to really truly attract that 9th position, and you need to kind of work through those components.
So I'm just a little bit confused about what you said. So we have 8 now, and a trooper, and one's coming on in this budget, and something's coming out of the reserve. His training, I don't.
So
get
the
that
new
right.
person, the entry-level person in their entirety.
Yeah.
So their salary, their benefits, their training
Is not reflected.
is all going to be in the constabulary reserve.
So it's not reflected.
It's not reflected
Okay.
here.
And that will be the ninth officer for
That
works out.
potentially would be the ninth officer. So this budget right now before you, though, shows 9 certified officers, right? 9 constabulary officers, 1 resident state trooper. What I'm saying is that 9th officer, that ninth lateral person, that's the vacant position. So this budget that you have on this page right before you right now has 1 vacant position in it. You could decide to take a pause on that, remove that 1 vacant position from this. You still have your entry person in the reserve, and we're still moving forward with that entry person in reserve, but you're not trying to look for still a lateral at the same time.
So theoretically, you could have 10 if everything was,
Correct.
The end of the
Right.
day,
Like if
yeah.
if you were to keep that lateral position here and the entry position in the constabulary, in the reserve, then you would have 10. We would have gotten the goal. 10. Remember, we were supposed to hit that goal in 5 years.
Yeah.
It's been more than 5 years. But anyway,
So how many of our constabulary are retired state troopers?
not all of them. We have,
2 of them are not. 3 of them are not.
yeah, so we have 5. We have 5 that are we have 5 that are former resident state troopers, and we have 3 that are laterals from other departments. Again, 20-plus years at other departments, retiring out from those other departments, deciding that they still want to do law enforcement and stay very active and be part of a very active force.
I've tried to convince my sister to come out of retirement.
Yeah, I don't think that's happening. But it's not.
Getting back to the overtime at athletic games, how is that filled? Do you get a notice way in advance, or how does that?
The athletic director provides a game schedule to our administrator of that department. He then posts those and compares those to what the actual shift schedule is, and then offers the time slots to those that want to work on an overtime if there's not enough availability within the ASO pool to fill them.
So, but we could be, I don't know the right question to ask. So how do we budget for that? Maybe that, how do you budget overtime?
So, I mean,
It's
so
just-
yeah, we look
this is-
at what we've been doing for overtime over the last several years. We look at what are the demands? What's been driving that overtime? Has it been specific investigations? Has it been, is it athletic driven? Is it events driven? What is really driving it? You know, we build in the overtime that we know we're gonna need for our community events. We build in the overtime that we know we're gonna likely will be needed for ongoing investigation or managing cases that may be taken towards end of shift. That they can't just, oh, it's 11 o'clock at night, peace out, I'm done, right? Like, they don't get to do that. Sometimes I think they would love to do that. But they don't, so we have to build that in. And there's, that we build those in. And then looking at the game schedule, I want to say that looking at what Buddy had given me, I want to say that we had about almost 8,000 or 9,000 in overtime for athletics in the last year, but I want to double check my timeline on that. But so we track them all, right? We track whether, they put notes in everything, basketball game, football game, graduation, football parade, right? It's all time that we all have to go in on, so those are all things that that they put notes in. And so that's how we track it. That's how we dice it down and parse it down to, what is town versus what is additional ask by, athletic pieces or just special event purposes.
So when do we say no? When do you say yes or no?
Well, that's
How
where
is-
I'm having the conversation with, so I started having the conversation with Jeff, the assistant superintendent, and the athletic director. We need to meet with them to go over, what is your real expectation? Like, when you send down a schedule, is it just the heads up, hey, we're having games and you don't want anybody there? Or are you wanting people there? Because their communication hasn't changed. We still show up for these. You would think that if they don't want law enforcement there, when somebody shows up at the game, they're going to say, what are you guys doing here? Why are you here? Right? They're not doing that. Right? And oh, by the way, here's another schedule. Here's the whole wrestling schedule. Right? So I did let him know that, you guys got to set up a new expectation, right? Like, there doesn't have to be law enforcement at every single one of these games. So they're working through that, and then they're going to communicate with Buddy to determine what makes reasonable sense, right? When you have a large-scale wrestling tournament where you have hundreds of people at it, for safety and public safety purposes, you might need to have an officer there, right? But for just, a basketball game, do you really need to have a law enforcement officer there? I don't, or two, I don't know. So they're going to work through that to try and kind of reset those expectations, scale down so that way they're not, because I told them there's no way we're funding that level of ask
Has
on the
there
town
been,
side. They can pay for it.
Has there been incidents where the town constables have been, when they're at the game, their duties or services been required, or?
Not much. A couple of times, but largely those were anticipated, right? That's kind of what usually kicks off the, hey, we need somebody there because we're having a problem with, right?
Yep.
And then it's like, well, can you show up to the next one too, just in case? And then I think that's where it becomes well, we've always done it that way, right? Like, you've always come to these, right? And so I think that's where the resetting of expectation needs to happen.
So Mary, would that be an MOU? Would
No.
we set something, or would you just bill them every time?
We would just bill.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we don't need to have an MOU for that. We would just bill. Yeah, because we do bill them for the ASR and the ASO and the SRO. God, I can't talk.
It's lunchtime.
It could be.
Food's here.
Is it here? It's up to you guys whenever you want to recess.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Well, if we're at the end of a page, I think that'd be a good time to.
I had questions about this, did we get a new car? Is that-
The CNR, yes, we did get a new PD vehicle. We did do a replacement in the system, yes. And also the equipment, equipment non-vehicular, the $40,000 is a UTV. That is for being able to get around all of these very, not just our trail, it is our trails, but also our events, right? We have trying to move our PD around, Owen Bell during that event. So that's the request for the UTV. I will say that's another avenue that perhaps you decide to say, you know what, maybe you don't fund that, right? Maybe that's something that we look at, is there enough money in the reserve to manage that, right? And we fund that out of that as opposed to using mill rate for that.
Mary, with the weather getting warmer again, are we gonna have bike patrols?
We will be, yes.
Okay, somebody
Yes.
asked me and I almost forgot to ask.
Oh, yes,
Okay.
bike patrols will be coming out.
Okay.
Jehola will get on his bike.
Is there any difference too, as opposed to a UTV versus a golf cart? Like a lot of people use the golf carts.
Yeah, I think the UTV, they have a better ability to secure, it's because it's enclosed. They have a better ability to secure, especially during winter type events, but, and also for trails, this would also be able to allow them to go out and do, if they have to do a rescue on a trail, a UTV can do that, a golf cart can't.
Yeah, Owen Bell trails in the back there, pretty.
Right, or even Cat Hollow, right, those type of things. It would allow that deployment. Any other questions there?
Break for lunch?
That's fine. Yep.
Yeah, Meredith was so cute, Meredith was so cute yesterday, she was
Jason, do you want to formally recess for lunch so we can take you down?
I move to recess.
Okay. We have a motion to go into recess for lunch by Mr. Grandelski,
I'll second it.
seconded by Mr. Cottula. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? We are going into recess. It is currently 11:33.